Since Europeans set foot in North America, agricultural soil has been losing 0.07 inches every year. Fast enough that in just 30 years, the United States may have only 5% of its land left intact. A rate of degradation capable of pushing a global power to the brink of resource exhaustion. While modern science continues to struggle for a solution, the answer unexpectedly emerged from an idea once considered the most outrageous in conservation history: bringing bison back to dying lands. So how did this giant species, once nearly extinct, ignite a remarkable ecological revolution, transforming barren ground into thriving grasslands in just 10 years? In this episode, Terran Works will take you through the bison's return and how they once again became the greatest engineers of the North American prairie. To understand why bison can revive an entire dead landscape, we need to look back at the tragedy that has unfolded across the North American prairie for more than 400 years. Before humans set foot on this continent, it was home to a truly unique ecosystem, a massive sea of grass, stretching from Canada to Texas, so vast that scientists called it the Great Bison Belt. Within that immense expanse, tens of millions of bison moved like black rivers across a green field, becoming the beating heart that powered the entire ecosystem. The animal Americans still famously refer to as the buffalo of the United States. But when Europeans arrived in North America in the 16th century, everything began to spiral in a catastrophic direction. In less than a century, the population collapsed from 60 million bison to just 325. Behind the frenzy of bison hunting was not only the profit from hides and meat, it was also a silent strategy to weaken the livelihoods of indigenous communities, paving the way for European settlement. A small number were protected in isolated areas, while the rest of the prairie was carved apart by farms, plows, and cattle herds. The soil became compacted, native grasses withered, the microbial systems beneath the ground were shattered. The greatest consequence came with the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, when hundreds of millions of tons of topsoil were blown all the way into the Atlantic Ocean. That devastation forced the world to recognize that the prairie cannot survive without the very animal that shaped it for thousands of years. And then, in the early 21st century, at a time when every modern solution seemed to be failing, a few ecologists dared to propose an idea so bold it was considered absurd: letting nature operate again the way it did before humans arrived. So how exactly did that risky plan unfold, and what were the results? Instead of trying to change the soil, they bet on changing the grazers that lived on it. And the biggest change of all was reintroducing bison into lands that were already dead. Not fertile fields, but dry, cracked ground where even grass no longer existed. Every prediction suggested that bison wouldn't survive there for long. But the truth was completely different. Right after being released, the bison herd vanished from researchers' sight. Drones, GPS, even helicopters couldn't locate them. Many feared the herd had died or escaped the experimental area. But in fact, they were moving toward higher ground, where vegetation was almost non-existent. No one knew why they did this. The disappearance of the herd meant the entire project was on the brink of collapse. Over $10 million in research gone, and about 250 scientists facing job loss, dragging down the most ambitious ecological restoration effort in decades. But to understand why bison behaved this way, we need to look at the very nature of the species. Bison are not puzzle-solving intelligent like dolphins or crows, but they possess a survival instinct refined over tens of thousands of years. When living in a safe environment, they reveal a completely different side. Curious, observant, like a child discovering the world for the first time. A bison calf is taught to swim from its earliest days, always with the mother behind it, ready to plunge into the cold water if danger appears. This blend of courage, persistence, herd protection, and gentle curiosity is what makes them perfect ecological engineers, even though they never intended to play that role. And it was precisely these instincts that explained the unexpected event that followed. It turned out that their disappearance was the first sign that bison had not only survived, but had begun doing what ecological engineers do best: restoring the land. Unlike cattle, which tend to stand in one place and compact the soil into hardened patches, bison move constantly, almost never staying too long at a single point. Each of their steps loosens the topsoil, opening tiny channels that allow rainwater to soak in instead of running off. Every pile of dung scattered along their path becomes a natural source of nutrients, rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, that native grasses have lacked for decades. And each time a bison rolls on the ground, its nearly 1-ton body creates shallow depressions that hold water, allowing seeds to fall in and germinate inside these micro-nurseries scattered across the prairie. The principle behind these small pits works like natural water collectors. Instead of letting rain wash away the topsoil, they retain moisture, letting it seep slowly and stay longer in the ground. When rolling, bison also remove old, dead vegetation, exposing bare patches that seeds desperately need to sprout. So where do those seeds come from? Remarkably, from their fur. Most importantly, bison never overgraze an area. The herd is always moving, leaving behind patches of land with enough time to recover and regenerate. Through this cycle, the prairie began healing from the very first footprints they left. The first changes appeared quietly. After 3 years, small green patches emerged across what had once been considered hopeless land. After 4 years, native grasses returned in force. By the 10th year, drones recorded a scene no one believed possible. A near-dead desert had transformed into a vibrant grassland full of color. The return of vegetation also brought back wildlife. Bird species absent for 20 to 30 years began to return. Pollinating insects reappeared along with many small mammals. Foxes, coyotes, and bobcats began to re-establish themselves in the area. The soil retained moisture better. Streams that once dried up in summer now held water longer. The ecosystem seemed to remember how it had functioned when bison were present, and began restoring itself according to thousands of years of evolution. Findings from the Kansas Kanza Prairie show that in areas with bison, plant species richness increased by up to 86% over more than 3 decades. Meanwhile, areas grazed only by cattle increased by around 30%, and places without grazers were the least diverse of all. This demonstrates that the ecological role of bison cannot be replaced by any other species. Even cattle, despite their similar appearance, cannot create the same impact because they stand in one place for too long, compacting the soil, breaking its structure, and causing severe erosion. Regions where bison have been reintroduced are now expanding. Tallgrass Prairie Preserve in Oklahoma, once a cattle ranch, has become the largest restored tallgrass prairie in the world. Its herd has grown from 300 bison to nearly 2,000. In Montana, the American Prairie Project aims to create a wildlife corridor over 3.2 million acres with around 10,000 bison. In Mexico, where bison had completely disappeared since the 19th century, a herd reintroduced from 23 individuals in 2009 has now grown to over 200, helping revive the entire Llanos grassland. In many regions, such as Illinois, abandoned industrial zones have been transformed into prairie thanks to the return of bison. In reality, not every place can simply release bison and wait for a miracle. Many regions require fire, as fire was an essential component of prairie ecosystems for thousands of years. In Oklahoma, managers burn 1/3 of the reserve each year to mimic natural conditions. Fire removes dead vegetation, triggers strong regrowth of young grasses, and creates ideal food sources for bison. When bison and fire operate together under the ancient ecological pattern, the prairie revives more powerfully than with any artificial method. Data collected after 10 years of bison reintroduction shows soil moisture increasing by 25 to 40% after rainfall, erosion decreasing by nearly half, and plant species richness rising by 70 to 80%, depending on the region. Remarkably, areas that once lost all vegetation have become biodiversity hotspots. What's most impressive is that no technology, no irrigation system, and no artificial fertilizer was behind this transformation. Everything was achieved simply through the presence of bison and the natural processes they have followed for thousands of years. The success of bison restoration projects raises a larger question. What would happen if millions of bison, like those that once existed, were allowed to return across North America? Could the Great Plains regain their historic form? Could soil erosion, land degradation, and even climate change be reduced simply by letting nature do its job? What's certain is that bison have accomplished what humans have failed to do in hundreds of years of soil management. They transformed a dead landscape into a living ecosystem. They show us that ecological restoration does not always come from expensive technologies, but from understanding how natural systems work and restoring the missing pieces. Yet the greatest irony lies in the present. 95% of bison today exist only as a commercial product of the meat industry, while just 5% remain as true ecological engineers, the only individuals still capable of reviving an entire prairie. The bison meat industry is now worth over $350 million annually in the United States, with demand rising steadily by 10 to 15% thanks to its reputation as a high-protein, low-cholesterol superfood. This economic value has pushed most bison into industrial farming, unintentionally shrinking the chances for the species that once shaped an entire continent to recover naturally. Bison, with their hooves, their dung, their rolling bodies, and their ancient migration routes, once kept an entire continent functioning. When they disappeared, the prairie collapsed. When they returned, everything began to live again. The revival they produced after 10 years astonished scientists, but for nature, perhaps that is simply how things were always meant to be. The story of the bison is not just about the recovery of a single species, but a reminder that the prosperity of an entire continent can depend on the simplest, most overlooked links in nature's chain. And in their return, we are reminded that sometimes the most powerful solutions to our modern crises are the ones written into the land long before we arrived. And the final question for all of us is simple. If one bison herd can save a dying landscape, do we have the courage to let millions do the same?
The United States is being eaten alive in the most literal sense. From California to Florida, nearly 7 million feral pigs are rampaging across at least 35 states. Texas alone accounts for about 2.6 million, and feral pigs have been recorded in 99% of the state's 254 counties. What makes feral pigs especially dangerous isn't just their sheer numbers, but the way they survive and expand their territory. They are true opportunistic omnivores. They consume plant roots, tubers, grains, insects, bird eggs, reptiles, and even young animals. In just a single night, a sounder of 20 to 30 pigs can tear through dozens of hectares of farmland. Unlike native grazing species, feral pigs dig deep into the ground in search of food, overturning entire layers of topsoil. This behavior doesn't just destroy crops, it accelerates soil erosion, devastates microbial ecosystems, and leaves farmland requiring years to recover. In many southern states, farmers describe their fields after a single night of feral pig activity as looking like they've been plowed by tanks. And the destruction isn't limited to rural areas. In suburban neighborhoods and even cities, feral pigs have been documented tearing up golf courses, public parks, residential lawns, and even underground fiber optic cable systems. In Texas, there was even an incident where a military airfield was forced to temporarily shut down after a herd of feral pigs surged onto the runway at dawn, making it unsafe for aircraft to take off. If the ecological destruction weren't already severe enough, the economic impact of feral pigs makes the problem impossible to ignore. A study by Texas A&M University and the National Wildlife Research Center found that Texas alone loses more than $500 million every year to damage caused by feral pigs. This figure includes losses to crops, fences, rural roads, irrigation systems, water pumps, and other critical infrastructure. For many farmers, this is no longer a matter of some damage here and there, but a fight for survival. In Williamson County, Texas, one farmer reported that in a single night, a sounder of feral pigs destroyed 24 hectares of corn, causing losses of more than $40,000. In Brazos County, a cattle ranch suffered losses of around $60,000 after feral pigs dug so deep that they collapsed underground water pipelines. But the greatest loss isn't just financial. Many farmers live in constant anxiety, never knowing what their fields will look like the next morning. When the cost of protection exceeds the value of the harvest, they are forced to abandon their land. For them, feral pigs don't just destroy crops, they shatter their confidence in the future itself. Ironically, this disaster wasn't created by nature. It began with a human decision nearly 500 years ago. In the 16th century, Spanish expeditions brought pigs to the Americas as a kind of living food supply. They released pigs along coastlines so that later expeditions could hunt them when needed. Some of these animals escaped human control and began living in the wild. For centuries, these feral pig populations remained scattered and relatively limited. The turning point came in the early 20th century, when Europeans introduced Eurasian wild boar into the United States for recreational hunting. When domestic pigs escaped captivity and interbred with European wild boar, the U.S. unintentionally created an exceptionally dangerous hybrid. Today's feral hogs are neither fully domestic pigs nor pure wild boar. They are larger, stronger, more aggressive, and most critically, they reproduce far faster. A single sow can produce 2 litters per year, with 4 to 12 piglets per litter. As a result, feral pig populations can double in just a few years if left unchecked. When feral pigs began to emerge as a serious problem, humanity's first response was simple: set traps. For decades, corral traps have been one of the most common methods of feral hog control in the United States. These are typically large metal enclosures, baited with corn or fermented grain, designed to lure an entire sounder inside at once. In theory, the method seems effective. Night vision footage often shows pigs calmly entering the trap one by one, creating the illusion that the problem is under control. But the reality beyond the frame is very different. Once just 1 or 2 pigs are captured, the remaining animals immediately recognize the danger. They can remember trap locations for 6 to 12 months, alter their movement routes, and avoid those areas as if the food source never existed. There's also the human cost. An effective trapping system is far from set and forget. Farmers must check traps daily, constantly rebait them, transport captured pigs, and dispose of carcasses under challenging conditions. As a result, even if 200 to 300 pigs are removed in a year, a single breeding season is often enough for the population to rebound to near original levels, as if all previous efforts had never happened. When corral traps failed to deliver the expected results, many people turned to a more direct approach: hunting. Ground hunting for feral pigs, both day and night, has become a familiar sight across many southern U.S. states. Hunters carry rifles, night vision gear, thermal cameras, and infrared lights, tracking feral hogs through the darkness. On social media, nighttime hog hunting videos often rack up millions of views, creating the impression that humans are gradually regaining control. But as with trapping, that sense of victory mostly exists on screen. In the field, the effectiveness of individual hunting is extremely limited. Feral pigs are highly intelligent animals. After just a few missed shots, an entire sounder can learn to recognize the sound of gunfire, human scent, and dangerous travel routes, then alter their behavior as soon as the very next night. Hunting is made even more difficult by the feral pig's unique physical structure. A thick hide measuring 3 to 4 centimeters, combined with a dense layer of fat beneath it, makes smaller caliber bullets ineffective unless they strike a vital spot. Many hunters in Texas put it bluntly, miss by just a little, and it's pointless. Most importantly, hunting usually removes only a tiny fraction of the overall population. While humans hunt one animal at a time, feral pigs reproduce as a system. The result is that even as the number of pigs shot increases, the total population continues to expand, and the vicious cycle begins all over again. A question that often comes up whenever feral pigs are discussed is, why don't Americans eat them, when wild boar is a common delicacy in Europe? The answer comes down to 3 factors: disease, law, and culture. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, feral pigs in the United States carry more than 30 dangerous pathogens. In Texas alone, roughly 1/3 of tested feral pigs are positive for Brucella, a bacterium that can cause prolonged fever, joint pain, and even infertility in humans. Beyond Brucella, 14 to 18% of feral pigs carry the pseudorabies virus, and the prevalence of trichinella parasites in their meat is far higher than in commercially raised pork. This significantly increases the risk of infection if the meat is improperly handled or undercooked. Even when the meat could theoretically be made safe for consumption, U.S. law still blocks commercialization. Feral pigs are not slaughtered at USDA-approved facilities, which means their meat is completely banned from the official food supply chain. People may hunt and eat feral pigs themselves, but selling the meat is illegal. Finally, there is the cultural factor. Because of their wild diet and uncontrolled living conditions, feral pigs often have a strong odor, tougher meat, and inconsistent flavor. This runs directly counter to American consumer expectations, which favor pork that is tender, clean, and uniform on supermarket shelves. As a result, in the United States, feral pigs remain a non-commercial food source despite their massive numbers. While humans struggled with traps and guns, a native predator was quietly changing the balance: the coyote. Coyotes have existed in North America for hundreds of years and are now present in 49 of the 50 U.S. states. Despite humans killing an estimated 400,000 coyotes each year, their population has not declined. It has continued to expand. Around 2014, ecologists began noticing something unusual. Many feral pig nests were being dug up, yet the tracks around them did not belong to bears or gray wolves. Trail cameras in Texas, Oklahoma, and Georgia captured coyotes approaching piglet nests with remarkable precision, moving in from downwind, waiting until the sow left, then launching a rapid, coordinated attack. Laboratory evidence strengthened these observations. Stomach contents and scat samples from coyotes revealed fresh piglet DNA, proving that they were not merely scavenging carcasses, but actively hunting. Even more striking, this behavior appears to be learned and shared. Groups of coyotes coordinate with one another, clearly dividing roles and developing a new hunting strategy specifically adapted to feral pigs. The discoveries surrounding coyote predation on feral pigs quickly led scientists to a deeply controversial paradox. When humans kill coyotes to protect livestock, the outcome is the exact opposite of what they expect. Feral pig populations don't decline, they explode. Studies by Texas A&M University and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, show that as soon as predation pressure from coyotes disappears, piglet survival rates surge. In one Texas county, data revealed that when the coyote population dropped by 63% in just 3 years, piglet survival jumped from 21% to 68%, causing the overall feral pig population to increase 2.4 times. A similar pattern emerged in Georgia. Simply pausing coyote trapping for a short period led to feral pig densities more than doubling in many areas, even without any other environmental changes. These numbers point to a harsh reality. According to USDA estimates, to reduce a coyote population by 70% within 3 years, humans would need to kill more than 72% of coyotes every single year, a task that is nearly impossible in terms of both cost and scale. This forces wildlife managers to confront an uncomfortable truth. In today's ecosystem, coyotes are doing what humans cannot do effectively, controlling feral pigs at their most vulnerable stage. As the data increasingly showed that killing coyotes could actually trigger stronger feral pig population booms, Texas was forced to confront a hard truth. This problem could not be solved with isolated, single-method solutions. The state began to shift its approach, moving away from fragmented efforts toward a large-scale, integrated, and highly coordinated control strategy. Instead of relying solely on trapping or individual hunting, Texas deployed smart traps equipped with cameras, 4G connectivity, and remotely controlled gates. These systems allow operators to monitor pig sounders in real time and trigger the trap only when most of the group is inside, preventing the classic problem of catching a few pigs and teaching the rest to avoid traps. At the same time, helicopters were used to sweep vast, dense areas inaccessible by ground. In some regions, Texas also experimented with selective toxic bait placed in feeding stations that require significant force to open. Enough for feral pigs, but not for other wildlife. Yet the most critical factor wasn't any single technology. It was coordination across counties and regions. When one area intensified control efforts, neighboring areas acted simultaneously, preventing pigs from simply migrating to low-pressure zones where they could continue breeding. This time, results began to appear. In areas where the full strategy was applied for 18 to 24 months, feral pig populations declined by 60 to 70%. Many farmers reported a marked reduction in stress, and more importantly, they began cultivating land that had once been abandoned. For the first time in decades, control, not eradication, but balance, started to feel possible.
And it all began in one of the harshest regions of China, the Kubuki Desert, where winters are freezing with knife-sharp winds dropping temperatures to minus 20 degrees Celsius, and summers are scorching, burning the ground beneath. In the past, this area was nothing like the barren desert it is today. Instead, it was once a prosperous agricultural land with villages, rivers, and vast grasslands capable of sustaining entire communities. Then everything changed. Winds grew stronger, grass disappeared. Desertification happened. Sand began to move, swallowing houses and roads. The remaining residents left one by one. According to 2025 reports, about 27.4% of China's land area has experienced desertification, equivalent to nearly 4 times the size of the U.S. state of Texas. The consequences include not only the collapse of biodiversity, but also increasingly frequent sandstorms that severely erode the topsoil and make recultivation almost impossible. If you cannot yet envision the scale of destruction, that is roughly 20 million tons of agricultural produce lost every year to the sea of sand. In this context, in just a few decades, the Kabuki Desert expanded more than 25 miles eastward, burying thousands of acres of farmland under dunes reaching up to 200 feet high, turning it into China's seventh largest desert with an area of more than 7,200 square miles. So how did a nation once swallowed by the desert to the brink of despair not only halt this catastrophe, but rise to become the greatest strategic rival to the United States? As early as the 1950s and 1960s, China launched one of the largest anti-desertification campaigns in history. Windbreak forests were planted, livestock grazing was restricted, and numerous deep wells were drilled through layers of dusty soil. Yet despite massive effort and resources, the results were almost zero. The desert kept advancing, threatening the livelihoods of more than 400 million residents living in the semi-arid regions of northern and northwestern China. But China wouldn't be China if it couldn't find an intelligent solution to any problem. And that turning point began with one man, Wang Wenbiao, later known as the Desert King. What's remarkable is that he was not born into wealth or privilege. On the contrary, Wang was once a poor teacher in Inner Mongolia, cycling more than 6 miles across sand every day to reach his classroom. There were days when the wind was so strong that his bicycle was buried halfway in sand and sand whipped into his face and straight into his lungs. It was in those harsh conditions that he made a bold vow: if I cannot escape the desert, I will make it pay rent. And the incredible thing is, he actually did. In 1988, when he owned only a small salt company and had almost nothing in hand, Wang Wenbiao decided to attempt what no one else dared to do. He poured all his savings, even borrowed more, to pursue an ambition that seemed impossible, turning sand into living soil. People called him crazy. The authorities saw him as a dreamer. Yet Wang chose to live right in the desert, measuring every drop of moisture and patiently observing the tiniest changes in the soil. He began by spending hundreds of millions of dollars to build windbreak walls, plant more than 60 million willow trees, and green 1,500 square miles of barren land. But the true breakthrough came when he devised a strategy no one had ever tried before: bringing rabbits into the desert. Today, more than 1.2 million Rex rabbits live in areas once swallowed by sand. This French hybrid breed is considered the white gold of the fur industry. Fur soft as velvet, sleek as otter skin, with no coarse hairs, and each pelt can sell for up to $30. A female rabbit can produce 25 litters a year, yielding 200 to 300 offspring, endure cold down to -20 degrees Fahrenheit, and consume very little water. Perfect for the harsh environment of Kabuki. Wang soon realized that to raise rabbits in the desert, he first had to create shade and a food source, and willow trees were the key. With roots extending more than 300 feet deep, the willows could draw groundwater, hold the sand in place, and create a cooler microclimate. Once the willows stood firm, the rabbits could survive, and once the rabbits survived, the soil began to recover. But planting trees in a barren desert of scorching sand and raging dust storms was a task that demanded extraordinary faith and patience. First, workers had to identify locations with the highest potential to retain moisture, then dig deep pits so willow roots could reach the damp soil beneath the burning sand. After that, they built temporary fences of wire mesh and reed around the pits to reduce wind strength and keep sand from filling them back in within hours. Young willow saplings were treated with a moisture-retaining solution, then planted straight into the ground and secured with stakes to prevent strong winds from uprooting them. In the first weeks, each willow was shielded with a sunshade and drip irrigated with just enough water to encourage the roots to drill deeper underground. Only once the willows had stabilized the microclimate could Wang introduce the second critical component of the ecosystem, the Rex rabbits. Rex rabbits were never released into the wild but raised in enclosed ecological farms. Their meat became food, their fur became clothing, their organs became medicine, but most important of all was their manure. Rabbit manure contains nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the very nutrients desert sand completely lacks. When dropped onto the ground, the manure transforms sand into moist, nutrient-rich humus. Remarkably, Rex rabbits cannot digest grass seeds, meaning they unintentionally sow seeds along with natural fertilizer packets. From there, an ecological loop emerged. Willows feed rabbits, rabbits feed the soil feeds the willows. As a result, each acre of land produced more than 5 tons of humus per year, and within just 3 to 5 years, golden sand turned into fertile soil. Thanks to this model, more than 200 million willow trees have been planted, creating a massive green wall that reduces wind speed by up to 90% and blocks 15 million tons of sand each year. As the ecosystem began to recover, Kabuki rapidly transformed into a massive ecological economic laboratory. The first phase was a battle against the sand. Dozens of bulldozers and several hundred workers operated almost around the clock to level the terrain, stabilize the dunes, and construct windbreak barriers. Within just a few years, about 700 to 800 square miles of desert had been greened, laying the foundation for the next stage, the Rex rabbit farming model. Around 1.2 million rabbits not only helped revive the soil, but also generated more than 100 million yuan in economic value each year, providing stable livelihoods for thousands of households in areas once swallowed by sand. Once the local economy was secure, Wang expanded his ambitions by building the Junma solar power plant, using 196,000 panels arranged in the shape of a giant galloping horse, the world's largest energy artwork, certified by Guinness. The plant generates about 1.5 billion kilowatt-hours of electricity per year, enough to supply more than 200,000 people, while the panels themselves play an ecological role, creating shade, reducing wind speed by up to 50%, helping grass regrow, and turning rabbits, sheep, and geese into biological lawnmowers that keep the soil stable. For more than a decade, Kabuki proved that ecological economics can become a true engine of development. From 2010 to 2020, the model generated 10 billion USD, making it the most profitable green model in Asia. On that foundation, the Junma solar plant continued expanding its impact. By 2022, the project had saved 760,000 tons of coal and reduced 1.85 million tons of CO2. While in just 4 years transforming 2,600 acres of the Dead Sea into a thriving energy oasis. Then the unimaginable happened. After decades of human struggle against sand, nature finally responded. A 2023 report from China's Ministry of Ecology stunned the world. Populations of wild deer, desert foxes, and migratory birds in Kabuki had increased 4-fold compared to 1990. Species once vanished reappeared. Groundwater, Kabuki's liquid gold, rose by an average of 5 to 6.5 feet over 20 years. It means that if you drill a well today, you only need to drill half the depth your grandparents did. And that difference marks the boundary between dead land and living land. Not only animals, but more than 100 native plant species, such as feathergrass, desert poplar, and various desert flowers, returned, creating an almost unbelievable sight. Golden sand interwoven with green grass, even patches of small shimmering forests under the sunlight. However, the journey has not been without controversy. Some experts argue that the role of rabbits has been exaggerated and that most of the success stems from state planning and massive investment. In addition, several pilot zones have reported nitrogen pollution or the appearance of green algae, raising questions about the long-term sustainability of the entire model. Now let's fly 4,000 miles south to Australia, where rabbits once caused one of the most devastating ecological disasters in history. In the 19th century, only 24 rabbits were brought in for recreational hunting. Yet within just 50 years, their population exploded to more than 1 billion, stripping grasslands bare, destroying tree roots, and turning nearly 2/3 of Australia's plains into desert-like wastelands. The Australian government tried everything, building a 2,000-mile fence, releasing viruses, using explosives, carrying out mass culling, but still failed to control them. So what made rabbits monsters in Australia but saviors in China? The answer lies in human action. In Kabuki, Rex rabbits were never released into the wild. They were part of a closed ecological chain, tightly managed, eating willows, producing manure, restoring soil, and generating economic value. China wasn't simply raising rabbits. It was building a strategic ecosystem in which rabbits were just one precisely calculated link in the entire soil recovery cycle. Although controversies remain, the results were still convincing enough for the United Nations to recognize Kabuki as a global model for land restoration in 2011 and as an international demonstration center in 2019. From there, Wang's story quickly extended beyond China's borders. This ecological economic model spread to Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe, where many nations are struggling with desertification and climate change. Most notable is Andalusia, Spain, the largest semi-arid region in Europe. Here, the government has begun adopting a Kabuki-style approach, building a Mediterranean green wall, restoring native plants, implementing regenerative agriculture, and constructing agro-PV solar farms. From a dead land, Kabuki has become a symbol of hope. If a desert in China can be revived, the question is, what is stopping the rest of the world?
The Negev is not merely a desert. It is a harsh test of the limits of human endurance. In the 1950s, David Ben-Gurion, the founding father of the State of Israel, put forward a vision that many considered insane: make the desert bloom. But the reality at the time was brutally unforgiving. Summer temperatures were extreme, and surface water sources were virtually non-existent. Efforts to divert water from the Sea of Galilee in the north to the south through the national water carrier ran into two major walls: fierce opposition from neighboring countries and the hard constraints of geology. Israel gradually realized that if it relied solely on the water granted by the sky, failure was inevitable. In the Negev, life was not a story of development, but a problem of survival, where every mistake came at the cost of collapse. For decades, the Negev served mainly as a site for military bases and small, scattered communities living off every carefully conserved drop of water. The aridity here did not simply mean a lack of drinking water, it strangled all economic potential. Yet it was precisely in this extreme thirst that Israeli scientists stopped looking up at the sky to pray for rain, and instead began to look down, deep into the ground beneath their very feet. Beneath the scorching sands of the Negev desert lies a secret that had been buried for tens of thousands of years. In 1973, during a geological exploratory drilling operation, Israeli scientists accidentally discovered a massive body of water more than 2,300 feet below the surface. An aquifer originating from the Nubian system. Directly beneath one of the driest regions in the Middle East, Billions of cubic meters of water were locked within porous rock layers dating back to prehistoric times. But this was no ordinary water source. It was fossil water, formed tens of thousands of years ago when North Africa's climate was still humid and not replenished by modern rainfall. More importantly, it was brackish water, neither fresh nor seawater. Dissolved within it were minerals such as magnesium, calcium, and potassium at concentrations high enough to kill most crops within just a few days. For much of the world, this would be a nearly useless resource. However, by the early 1990s, scientists at the Jacob Blaustein Institutes for Desert Research began to view this aquifer differently. They realized that because it lay so deep underground, the Nubian water beneath the Negev maintained a stable temperature of around 38 degrees Celsius, unaffected by cold winters or surface pollution. It was a warm, stable fossil ocean, completely isolated from the modern world, like a time capsule from the prehistoric era, waiting to be unlocked. And it was here that a critical question emerged. If the water was already so saline, why didn't Israel, a country renowned for its desalination technology, simply turn it into fresh water? To speak of Israel is to speak of desalination technology. The country is one of the world's leaders in the field, with massive desalination plants lining the Mediterranean coast, supplying most of the population's domestic water. So why not run pipelines from the sea into the Negev, or desalinate the very groundwater lying beneath the desert? The answer lies not in engineering, but in economics and energy. Modern desalination relies primarily on reverse osmosis, RO, technology, which forces water through ultrafine membranes under extremely high pressure to remove salt. This process demands enormous amounts of electricity, complex pumping systems, and continuous operating costs. It is highly effective for urban drinking water, but becomes an immense burden when applied to large-scale agriculture, where each hectare may require tens of millions of gallons of water per year. The cost of agricultural products would skyrocket, making them uncompetitive on the international market. And that is not the end of the problem. Desalination also produces brine, a highly concentrated saline wastewater loaded with salts and minerals. Along the coast, brine can be diluted and discharged into the ocean. But in the Negev desert, dealing with brine is almost an unsolvable problem. If released into the soil, it would destroy microorganisms, disrupt soil structure, and cause long-term damage to an already fragile ecosystem. Israel realized it needed a smarter approach, not turning saline water into fresh water for conventional crops, but finding an organism that could thrive in that very stream of hot, salty water. And that was when tropical fish entered the picture. The idea of raising fish in the middle of a desert sounds like a joke at first, but in reality, it was a highly strategic move. Israeli scientists realized that the salinity of the Negev's groundwater, only about 1/10 that of seawater, matched almost perfectly the ideal habitat of several fish species with high economic value. Barramundi, also known as Asian sea bass, is one of them. This is an ancient species that lives in estuaries and brackish waters across Australia and Southeast Asia. In the wild, barramundi thrive in environments where fresh water and seawater mix, with consistently high temperatures year-round. They spawn in saltwater, then migrate upstream into rivers, making them exceptionally well adapted to constant changes in salinity and temperature. These biological traits make barramundi extremely difficult to farm efficiently in Europe or North America. During winter, outdoor water temperatures often drop below survival thresholds, forcing fish farms to rely on heating systems that consume vast amounts of energy and fossil fuels. Rising operating costs drive up prices, leaving the product expensive and uncompetitive. In the Negev, however, this problem simply disappears. Groundwater pumped from deep aquifers is already warm, with stable temperatures throughout the year. No heaters are needed. No additional fuel is required. What was once considered the desert's greatest disadvantage, the heat, becomes a source of free energy. Alongside barramundi, researchers also selected tilapia and European sea bass, species that tolerate salinity well and adapt quickly to controlled farming environments. From the early 2000s onward, fish farms began to appear across the Negev desert. On land once considered worthless, vast earthen ponds and industrial-scale concrete tanks were built one after another. Groundwater was pumped up from deep aquifers, continuously aerated, and then stocked with hundreds of thousands of fish in each pond. The results came faster than anyone had expected. The fish adapted almost immediately, as the conditions closely matched their natural evolutionary environments. Within just a few years, the Negev transformed into one of Israel's most efficient aquaculture regions. By the late 2000s, total fish production in the Negev exceeded 3,000 tons per year, with most of it destined for export. Fish raised in the middle of the desert began appearing in supermarket chains across France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, competing directly with ocean-caught fish from Australia and Southeast Asia. With consistent quality, year-round supply, and tightly controlled costs, Negev fish quickly secured a foothold in international markets. Yet this rapid growth also brought with it a challenge, one that every intensive aquaculture system in the world eventually has to confront. Each fish consumes about 3% of its body weight every day. When a single pond contains hundreds of thousands of fish, the amount of feed entering the system is enormous. What is not absorbed does not simply disappear. It is rapidly broken down and converted into ammonia, a compound that is extremely toxic to fish. Once ammonia concentrations exceed just 2 parts per million, fish gills begin to suffer damage, the nervous system weakens, and mortality rates rise sharply. In conventional aquaculture systems, this is the point at which technological intervention becomes unavoidable. Installing complex mechanical and biological filtration systems combined with continuous water circulation and aeration. These systems are effective, but they come at a high cost. The electricity consumption alone can be equivalent to that of dozens of households, driving operating expenses sharply upward. Another option, commonly used in marine aquaculture, is to discharge wastewater into the environment. Polluted water is diluted in the ocean, trading environmental contamination for the survival of the fish stock. But in the Negev, this option simply does not exist. There is no sea to discharge into, and even more importantly, there is no water to waste in an arid desert. While the fish tanks were gradually suffocating from the buildup of waste, not far away, olive groves and date palms were lacking the very thing the desert has least of all: nutrients. That was when researchers at Ben Gurion University carried out a bold experiment. Instead of treating wastewater from the fish tanks as something to be processed and discarded, they decided to channel the water, rich in fish waste and nitrogen compounds, directly to irrigate salt-tolerant crops. The results exceeded all expectations. Olive trees and date palms were not only unharmed by the salinity, but actively absorbed the organic matter from the fish as an extremely effective natural fertilizer. Experiments showed that olive yields increased by 15 to 20%, and the oil content of the fruit was also higher compared to traditional irrigation methods. Dates grown in the Negev were larger, sweeter, and quickly became premium products on international markets, selling for 20 to 30% more than dates from conventional growing regions. This model is known as integrated aqua agriculture, the integration of aquaculture with agriculture. At its core, it is a closed-loop system. Hot, saline water is pumped up from deep underground to raise fish in sensor-controlled tanks. Once the water has absorbed nutrients from the fish, it is not discarded, but instead channeled through a network of pipes to nearby fields. There, drip irrigation technology delivers precisely the required amount of water to each individual plant. No loss from evaporation, no runoff, no waste. The same water that raises fish also nourishes crops and is gradually purified before returning to the ground. The system functions like a living, intelligent organism in which every component supports the others. It simultaneously solves 3 of the desert's greatest challenges: food, water, and waste. By 2024, this integrated fish agriculture model had significantly increased agricultural output in the Negev and become a central pillar of Israel's food security strategy. And in the face of intensifying climate change, the value of this system goes far beyond the story of food alone. In the modern world, a project is not truly successful unless it is also carbon sustainable. The Negev system proves this by harnessing naturally hot groundwater from deep underground, completely eliminating the need for heating in fish farming, one of the largest sources of emissions in aquaculture. At the same time, nutrient-rich wastewater from the fish dramatically reduces the use of chemical fertilizers, thereby cutting the energy and fossil fuels required for agricultural production. But the Negev is not just an environmental story. Economically, a region once seen as a national burden has been transformed into a high-value production hub. Barramundi, tilapia, and olive oil from this desert are now present in premium markets in New York and London. Analyses show that the integrated fish agriculture model generates economic value per cubic meter of water up to 10 times higher than that of traditional agriculture. More importantly, the Negev has become a blueprint for arid regions around the world, from Arizona in the United States to the Middle East. Yet one question remains unanswered. Can humanity sustain this balance when fossil water resources are finite? Welcome to Spain, a land of sunshine, vast open fields, and once thriving Mediterranean ecosystems. But behind this beauty lies a very different reality, where nature is gradually losing its balance. Today, around 75% of the country's territory is at risk of desertification, equivalent to more than 370,000 square kilometers of land under pressure from drought and ecological decline. In rural regions such as Extremadura and Castilla-La Mancha, this degradation is becoming increasingly visible, turning once fertile landscapes into dry, fragile terrain. One of the clearest signs of this imbalance is wildfires. Each year, the country records between 10,000 and 15,000 fires, burning an average of 80,000 to 120,000 hectares of forest. In extreme years like 2022, that number can exceed 300,000 hectares, with direct economic losses estimated between 1 and 3 billion euros annually, not including long-term damage to soil, water resources, and biodiversity. But wildfires are only the tip of the iceberg. At a deeper level, the ecological structure is shifting in subtle yet dangerous ways. As large herbivores disappear, vegetation is no longer naturally managed, allowing biomass to accumulate into dense layers of dry material, reaching 10 to 20 tons per hectare, effectively creating massive fuel reserves for fast-spreading fires. At the same time, the land itself is losing its basic functions. In many areas, water infiltration capacity has declined by 30 to 50%, preventing rainwater from soaking into the ground. Instead, it runs off the surface, accelerating erosion and washing away the fertile topsoil. All of these factors are combining into a cycle of degradation, where the land becomes drier, ecosystems grow weaker, and extreme events become more frequent, gradually turning large parts of the country into landscapes that are losing their ability to sustain themselves. Faced with large-scale degradation, Spain has implemented a range of technical solutions to control vegetation and restore land. However, each approach comes with its own limitations. Mechanical vegetation clearing, for instance, can cost between 300 and 1,200 euros per hectare per year, depending on terrain. Applied to just 100,000 hectares, total costs can exceed 50 to 100 million euros annually, and must be repeated continuously, as vegetation typically regrows within just 3 to 6 months. Chemical methods have also been used, but their drawbacks quickly became evident. Rather than targeting specific plants, they often disrupt entire ecosystems. In many cases, soil microbial density can drop by as much as 40 to 60% following large-scale herbicide use, making long-term recovery even more difficult. Large-scale reforestation projects have also been deployed, with average costs ranging from 1,000 to 5,000 USD per hectare. However, achieving stable canopy coverage takes at least 5 to 10 years, and survival rates for young trees in arid conditions can fall to just 50 to 70% without ongoing maintenance. The common thread across all these solutions is their dependence on continuous resources. Once funding stops, ecosystems almost immediately begin to revert to their original degraded state. And then, an idea emerged, one that went against everything that had been done before. Not to build more, but to return control back to nature itself. Starting in the early 2000s, European ecologists began experimenting with a new approach, reintroducing large herbivores to restore lost ecological balance. And among all the possible choices, they selected a very particular species, the Shosky horse. Shosky were not chosen because they are rare, but because they are one of the very few species that have preserved almost all the traits of a truly wild horse. The most important difference is not their size, but how they interact with the environment. While domesticated horses, cattle, or sheep tend to graze selectively, focusing on nutrient-rich areas, Shosky consume almost every type of vegetation, from young grasses and shrubs to even tough, thorny plants that other animals avoid. Unlike domestic horses that have undergone thousands of years of selective breeding, Shosky have never been optimized for human use. They possess 66 chromosomes, 2 more than domestic horses, making crossbreeding nearly impossible. They are smaller, standing only about 1.2 to 1.4 meters at the shoulder, and weighing around 250 to 350 kilograms. Yet in return, they have extraordinary endurance, capable of traveling dozens of kilometers each day under harsh conditions without any care. In the wild, their movement is far from random. Each herd appears to follow an invisible map, a navigation system shaped by collective memory and environmental signals. In addition, their reflexes are extremely fast, and they remain in a constant state of alert. If threatened, they will kick, bite, or flee immediately. To them, humans are a danger, and it is precisely this trait that makes them so valuable, because restoring a wild ecosystem requires animals that are truly, completely wild. Unlike restoration projects that require millions of dollars each year, a stabilized population of Shosky requires virtually no long-term operational cost. Each individual consumes between 20 and 40 kilograms of vegetation per day, equivalent to roughly 10 to 15 tons per year. Multiplied across dozens or even hundreds of animals, the amount of flammable biomass removed becomes enormous, naturally reducing wildfire risk without the need for machinery. In doing so, they not only consume excess vegetation, but also open pathways for other plant species to grow, creating a more diverse ecosystem. Their impact doesn't stop at the surface, it extends deep into the soil. Their constant movement helps break up compacted ground, improving water infiltration and activating microbial systems. Studies have shown that microbial density can increase by up to 150 to 200% after just a few years, enhancing soil fertility and water retention, critical factors at a time when more than 40% of the world's land is degrading. Economically, Shosky also bring measurable benefits. In Europe, rewilding areas have reported tourism increases of 20 to 40% within just 3 years, generating millions of euros annually for local communities. But perhaps the greatest value of Shosky is not found in the numbers. It lies in what they represent. A new approach, where humans do not try to replace nature, but instead learn how to restore it, and then step back to let it take over. In the early 1990s, the first reintroduction projects began in Mongolia, particularly in Hustai National Park. In the initial phase, each release involved only about 16 to 20 individuals, and it took more than a decade to rebuild the first stable populations. This early success in Asia paved the way for a new approach in Europe, rewilding. In Spain, Shosky horses began to be introduced into ecosystem restoration projects around the 2010s as part of large-scale rewilding programs. These efforts typically take place in semi-arid, sparsely populated regions, covering areas from 1,000 to over 10,000 hectares. Landscapes that have degraded, but still retain the potential to recover. But bringing this species back is extremely challenging, especially during transportation. Shosky are among the most stress-sensitive animals ever studied. Their resting heart rate ranges from 30 to 40 beats per minute. Yet, under strong stimulation, it can double within seconds. They are not transported like typical animals, but more like a highly fragile biological system. Light must be carefully controlled, noise reduced to an absolute minimum, and each individual must travel alongside familiar companions to prevent panic. Yet even after surviving the journey, the real challenge is only just beginning. Because the problem is not simply getting them there, but ensuring they choose to stay. When introduced into a new environment, Shosky cannot adapt immediately. Their digestive system, shaped over thousands of years in the grasslands of Central Asia, can react negatively to entirely different vegetation. They must rely on what remains of their evolutionary memory. Even a small dietary mistake or a sudden change in food intake can push them into exhaustion and lead to death within just a few days. That is why they must go through a transitional period lasting from 4 to 12 weeks, during which new plant species are gradually introduced into their diet to allow their gut microbiome to adjust. But even then, there's no guarantee of success. Some individuals simply cannot adapt to the new environmental rhythm. For this reason, scientists do not release them immediately. Instead, they create a controlled acclimatization phase, where the animals slowly become familiar with the scent of the soil, local vegetation, and climate conditions. In reality, during the early stages of reintroduction, this species was already extremely rare. In 1968, Shosky was declared extinct in the wild. The reason was not weakness, but their inability to compete with humans. As grasslands were converted into farmland, as wars spread, and as hunting intensified, they lost their entire natural habitat. By the end of the 20th century, only 12 individuals remained, all in captivity within zoos. What makes the situation even more challenging is that Shosky do not reproduce quickly. Each individual requires nearly a full year of gestation, and typically only one foal is born at a time. With an initial population of just a few dozen individuals, this rate is far too slow to generate rapid growth. This means the project cannot be evaluated over a few years. It must be measured in decades. And throughout that time, even a single disruption, a disease outbreak, a harsh winter, or a management error could cause the entire system to collapse. This is not a project that can simply be tried again. It is a one-time chance. Although it brings significant promise, the reintroduction of Shosky is far from a perfect solution. One of the biggest concerns is the potential for temporary imbalance within the ecosystem. When a large herbivore is introduced into a new environment, especially one that has been altered over centuries, it can exert strong pressure on vegetation in a short period of time. This concern also echoes past experiences, such as the introduction of the cane toad, a biological solution that spiraled out of control and became an ecological disaster in Australia. If population density becomes too high, Shosky can consume large amounts of vegetation within a limited area, leading to localized depletion of grass cover. Some studies suggest that densities above 1–2 individuals per hectare can begin to place pressure on food resources if not properly distributed. In addition, their constant movement may disturb the habitats of smaller species, particularly those that depend on low vegetation for shelter and survival. Furthermore, Shosky are not native to Spain. Introducing a non-native species into an ecosystem always carries risks, especially the potential for competition with native species, particularly grazing livestock that already depend on the same land. What Shosky are doing is not something new in nature. In another part of the world, there is a species performing the same role on a much larger scale and in an even more forceful way. The African savanna elephant is the largest land animal on Earth, weighing up to 6 to 7 tons and standing over 3 meters tall. They primarily live in the vast savannas of East and Southern Africa, such as Kenya, Tanzania, and Botswana, where the landscape constantly shifts between grasslands and sparse woodlands. With their flexible trunks, large tusks, and immense strength, elephants are not just animals, but true ecosystem engineers. Each day, an adult elephant can consume up to 150 kilograms of vegetation, including grass, leaves, bark, and even young trees. While foraging, they often knock down small trees, break branches, and open up gaps in the forest. It may seem destructive, but this behavior actually allows sunlight to reach the ground, enabling grass to grow and sustaining grassland ecosystems that hundreds of other species depend on for survival. Not only that, elephants also play a crucial role in seed dispersal. A single elephant can travel dozens of kilometers each day, carrying seeds through its digestive system and depositing them in new areas, helping regenerate vegetation across large landscapes. Studies show that regions with elephants can increase biodiversity density by up to 20 to 30%. But not all species reshape the environment through sheer force. Some do it through quiet, repeated actions every single day. In North America, long before humans arrived at large scale, one species sustained entire grassland ecosystems for thousands of years, the American bison. With populations once reaching 30 to 60 million individuals, they moved in massive herds stretching hundreds of kilometers, constantly grazing, yet never staying in one place for too long. Each adult bison consumes around 15 to 25 kilograms of grass per day, but the key is not the amount they eat, it's how they move. Unlike confined livestock, bison are always on the move, creating a dynamic vegetation structure. Some areas with short grass, others with tall grass, some recently grazed, and others in recovery. This system is known as a mosaic grassland, forming the foundation for hundreds of other plant and animal species to thrive. Even their behavior of rolling on the ground creates shallow depressions that collect water, becoming microhabitats for insects and young plants. When bison were hunted to near extinction in the 19th century, grassland ecosystems quickly began to deteriorate. Vegetation grew unchecked, soil became compacted, and wildfire risks increased significantly. And this is the key point. Bison do not save ecosystems, they simply live. But the way they live is exactly what allows the ecosystem to exist. And in a similar way, that is precisely what Shosky are beginning to do, though in a completely different context. In the end, the story of Shosky is not just about a species of horse. It is about how humans are beginning to change the way they see nature. For centuries, we believed that to control the world, we had to build more, bigger, and more complex systems. And if Shosky can succeed, it won't just change how we restore ecosystems. It may redefine how we see our role in this world. What do you think? Should humans continue to control nature, or is it time to step back and learn to let it recover on its own? Sottunga is located in the Åland archipelago, between Finland and Sweden, surrounded by thousands of small rocky islets rising from the cold waters of the Baltic Sea. From above, the island appears as a solitary patch of green amid gray waters, with a rugged coastline, barren rock outcrops, and low meadows stretching along the sea's edge. Sottunga covers only about 10 square kilometers and has a population of fewer than 100 people. There are no cities, no industrial zones, and no waves of mass tourism. Life here moves slowly. Narrow roads wind past scattered wooden houses. Winters are long and dark, while summers are brief yet filled with light. Ecologically, Sottunga is almost an ideal environment for observation. There are few people, little interference, and few uncontrollable variables. There are no large predators and no densely layered ecological networks like those on the mainland. Even the smallest changes can become clearly visible over time. It was precisely Sottunga's isolation and simplicity that drew scientists' attention. To them, the island was not just a quiet natural space, but an almost ideal environment for answering a fundamental question in ecology. How can a population survive when it is completely isolated? To explore that question, in the summer of 1991, Finnish scientists introduced caterpillars of Melitea synxia to the island. The caterpillars were divided into several small groups and released into meadow areas that had been surveyed in advance. On the surface, this action caused no obvious disturbance. There was no mass invasion, no immediate change that caught the attention of the island's residents. The caterpillars crawled slowly across the leaves, feeding, growing, and continuing their life cycle as if they had always belonged there. However, this was not a random decision. Each group of caterpillars was carefully documented. The release location, timing, weather conditions, and surrounding plant species were all recorded in detail. From a scientific standpoint, the experiment was considered controlled, at least within the limits of the variables that humans could observe and measure. Why choose butterflies rather than birds, mammals, or other insects? In ecology, not every species is suitable for long-term experimentation. Scientists selected butterflies for very specific reasons. First, the species does not migrate. Once born in a particular place, it will almost certainly live and die there. On a small island, this trait is especially important, as it allows researchers to define and control population boundaries without worrying about individuals leaving or new ones arriving from outside. Second, butterflies have relatively short life cycles. Within just a few years, scientists can observe multiple successive generations, directly tracking phases of growth, decline, and recovery, processes that might take decades to unfold in birds or large mammals. Third, butterflies are highly sensitive to environmental conditions. Even small changes in weather, vegetation, or seasonal timing quickly affect larval survival rates and adult population numbers. This sensitivity makes them particularly effective ecological indicators. Finally, the butterfly species Melitea synxia had already been extensively studied in the Åland archipelago for many years prior. The scientists entered the experiment with the confidence that they understood their subject well enough to anticipate most possible outcomes. Yet that very confidence created a paradox. When focusing too closely on a single species, it is easy to forget that no organism exists in isolation. The butterfly may have been at the center of the study, but it was only one link in a far more complex biological network. You know, transporting adult butterflies is nearly impossible. Their short lifespan, high sensitivity to stress, and tightly synchronized reproductive timing mean that even a small delay can cause an experiment to fail. For a study conducted on an island, that risk is simply too great. So instead of moving adult butterflies, the scientists focused on caterpillars in the diapause stage. Diapause is a special biological state in which development is almost completely paused. The caterpillars do not grow, do not pupate, and consume very little energy. This diapause state was artificially maintained by keeping the caterpillars at around 5 degrees Celsius, 41 degrees Fahrenheit, slowing their biological clock. Under these conditions, they could be stored and transported safely, without exhaustion and without entering the most vulnerable stages of their life cycle. Once removed from the cold environment and released onto Satunga Island, diapause ended. The caterpillars were exposed again to natural conditions, began feeding on their host plants, resumed development, pupated, and eventually emerged as adult butterflies right where they had been released. When the first caterpillars were released onto Satunga Island, their survival did not depend on the island's size, nor on human presence. It depended on their host plant, Plantago lanceolata. This plant is the primary and nearly irreplaceable food source for Melitea synxia caterpillars throughout their entire larval stage. From the very first days after hatching, the caterpillars must find this plant. Without it, their life cycle would end within just a few days. Plantago lanceolata is not a rare species in the wild, but it is selective about its growing conditions. It requires abundant sunlight and open grasslands, and it struggles to compete once shrubs or dense vegetation begin to encroach. On islands like Satunga, the survival of Plantago lanceolata depends directly on how grasslands are maintained over time. A reduction in grazing, or overly rapid natural succession, can allow woody plants to take over, causing the population of Plantago lanceolata to decline noticeably in a short period. What is striking is that the collapse of a butterfly population does not necessarily begin with parasites or disease. Sometimes the cause is simply a shortage of food. If Plantago lanceolata declines during a single growing season, large numbers of caterpillars may starve before they can pupate. There are no dramatic signs, no sudden catastrophe, just a quiet gap appearing in the life cycle of an entire population. Although Plantago lanceolata is the primary host plant, it is not the only option. Within Satunga's ecosystem, another plant species plays an equally important role. Veronica spicata. This is a secondary host plant for Melatea synxia caterpillars, and over the years, its presence has helped the butterfly population avoid complete collapse. The presence of Veronica spicata creates an important ecological buffer. When Plantago lanceolata temporarily declines due to unfavorable weather, localized drought, or shifts in grassland structure, Veronica spicata can serve as an alternative food source. This allows at least part of the caterpillar population to continue developing and survive harsh periods. However, this buffer is fragile. Veronica spicata is also a sun-loving species, dependent on open meadows and highly responsive to changes in land management. If both host plants decline simultaneously, even for a short time, the caterpillars are left with no alternatives. With limited mobility and no backup food source, the population can collapse at the larval stage. This leads to an ecological paradox. Satunga may appear spacious and lush to humans, but for the caterpillars, their world is confined to the distribution of just a few specific plant species. Everything beyond that range, no matter how abundant, holds no survival value for them. Even when the grasslands were maintained, and when Plantago lanceolata and Veronica spicata were still present, the caterpillars on Satunga were not truly safe. A few years after the experiment began, once enough long-term data had been collected to compare seasons, scientists began noticing something unusual. Many caterpillars were not dying from lack of food, nor from harsh weather. They grew, fed on leaves, and from the outside showed no visible signs of weakness. The population appeared to function normally. It was only when researchers began opening egg clusters and closely monitoring internal development that they discovered the presence of another organism, parasitoid wasps. These wasps are extremely small, entirely unlike the familiar image of wasps in everyday life. They have evolved to such a high degree of specialization that they parasitize only a very narrow range of hosts. In this case, their primary hosts were the eggs and larvae of Melatea synxia. Female wasps locate egg clusters or young caterpillars and lay their own eggs inside them. The wasp larvae then develop silently within the host's body, using the caterpillar as their food source. The process leaves no obvious external signs until the caterpillar's fate has already been sealed. What surprised the scientists most was the efficiency of the parasitoid wasps on the island. Over many years of observation, the wasps seemed able to locate a large proportion of the butterfly egg clusters and maintain a stable presence over time. Even when the butterfly population declined and later recovered, the parasitoid wasps reappeared with remarkable consistency. The parasitoid wasps were not the final layer of the story. Beneath them, on Satunga Island, an even deeper biological layer was quietly at work. It was Wolbachia, an intracellular parasitic bacterium that lives inside the bodies of insects and leaves almost no visible trace to the naked eye. Wolbachia does not live inside the caterpillars, nor does it kill them directly. But that does not mean it stands outside the story. In this experiment, Wolbachia was found inside the parasitoid wasps, the very species that directly determines the survival rate of the caterpillars. The bacterium is passed vertically from mother wasp to offspring, silently spreading across generations without ever needing direct contact with the final host. Rather than causing immediate death, Wolbachia interferes with more subtle mechanisms: reproduction, sex ratios, and the survival of the next generation of parasitoid wasps. Studies suggest that its presence can alter how parasitoid wasps interact with their environment, even making them more vulnerable to higher-level hyperparasitoids. When the parasite of the caterpillar is weakened, the pressure on the caterpillar population shifts accordingly. What makes Wolbachia so unsettling is its invisibility and quiet spread. There are no obvious symptoms, no early warning signs. Yet once Wolbachia enters a parasitoid wasp population that has never encountered it before, the entire balance between caterpillars, parasitoids, and the higher biological tiers above them can tilt in unpredictable ways. More than 30 years have passed since the first caterpillars were released onto Sotunga Island, and the experiment continues to be monitored with patience. The butterfly population has not disappeared, but it has never truly stabilized either. Numbers fluctuate over time, some years declining sharply, nearly reaching local extinction, then recovering again under more favorable conditions. What has drawn particular attention from scientists is that despite the island's small size, high isolation, and constant environmental pressures, the butterfly population has maintained a relatively high level of genetic diversity. At the same time, the parasitoid wasps and the bacterium Wolbachia have not vanished. They persist alongside the butterflies, tightly bound to the host life cycle, forming an overlapping, interdependent biological network that remains in a constant state of tension. Sotunga did not become an ecological paradise, but neither did it collapse into catastrophe. Instead, the island reveals a colder reality. Nature does not follow human intentions, whether good or bad. It does not reward, nor does it punish. It simply responds, slowly, precisely, and without mercy to the interventions we introduce. The Burmese python was never meant to be part of Florida. It did not arrive through natural ecological corridors, but through the glass cages of the exotic pet trade. Beginning in the 1970s, these giant snakes were imported into the United States as exotic pets. When young, they appeared harmless, easy to handle, neatly contained inside aquarium tanks at pet stores. Few imagined that these snakes could one day become a serious problem. But pythons never stop growing. As adults, they can reach lengths of 5 to 6 meters and weigh more than 90 kilograms. Many owners soon realized they had taken on more than they could manage. Some released their snakes into the wild. Others lost them during major storms. By the early 1990s, Burmese pythons began appearing sporadically across South Florida. At first, these sightings raised little concern. The Everglades were vast. The snakes were seen as isolated individuals, unlikely to cause any significant impact. But over time, reports increased. The pythons did not disappear. They multiplied, adapted, and quietly took over the wetlands. Only then did it become clear. This was no minor incident, but the beginning of a long-term ecological disaster. If the presence of Burmese pythons in Florida was once dismissed as a series of isolated incidents, the year 1992 changed that perception entirely. In August of that year, Hurricane Andrew tore through South Florida with unprecedented force. Homes were flattened, infrastructure collapsed, and amid the chaos, numerous reptile facilities were completely destroyed. Hundreds of pythons escaped at the same time, spilling into the wild with no remaining barriers to stop them. Biologists would later refer to this moment as the point of no return. Not because pythons appeared for the first time, but because from that moment on, they were no longer scattered individuals. Their numbers had become large enough to survive, reproduce, and expand their range. At the time, the Everglades was like a door left wide open. A warm year-round climate, dense vegetation, an intricate network of waterways, and an abundance of prey created an almost ideal environment. More importantly, this ecosystem had never evolved to contend with a giant snake of this kind. With no natural predators capable of keeping them in check, the Burmese python population exploded in silence over the decades that followed. No noise, no clear warning signs, Only when ecological voids began to emerge did people realize that the disaster had truly begun. By the early 2000s, the first signs of ecological imbalance began to surface. Researchers returned to areas of the Everglades once considered rich with life and noticed something deeply unsettling. Trails that had long been filled with raccoon tracks were suddenly empty. Marsh rabbits were nowhere to be seen. Bobcats, once familiar predators, had nearly vanished from many survey sites. Subsequent studies by the U.S. Geological Survey confirmed what many had already begun to suspect. In regions where Burmese pythons were most abundant, raccoon populations declined by as much as 99%, opossums by around 98%, and several small mammal species disappeared entirely. This was not a localized decline, it was a widespread collapse. Burmese pythons are not selective hunters. They consume anything they can overpower and swallow whole. Birds, deer, turtles, juvenile alligators, and even other predators. When a species sits at the top of the food chain without any natural rivals, its impact cascades through the entire ecosystem. Animals vanish first, followed by changes in vegetation, habitat structure, and the natural flow of energy. The Everglades did not collapse in a single dramatic shock. It weakened slowly, silently, until the ecological voids could no longer be ignored. Faced with the increasingly visible ecological voids in the Everglades, Florida was forced to act. The state rolled out a series of measures aimed at containing the spread of the Burmese python. Bounty hunting programs were expanded, placing humans on the front line of the fight. Events such as the Python Challenge drew thousands of hunters, wildlife officers, and volunteers into the swamps, where they tracked, captured, and killed pythons by hand or with rudimentary tools. These were not remote operations, but direct confrontations in a dangerous environment. Each python removed had to be found, subdued, and dealt with on the spot. At the same time, technology was brought into the battle as a support layer behind the scenes. GPS tracking, drones, infrared cameras, and environmental DNA analysis helped narrow down search areas, monitor movements, and guide people to the pythons' hiding places. As a result, thousands of pythons are removed from the wild each year. But those numbers quickly revealed their limits. Burmese pythons reproduce at a pace humans cannot match. A single female can lay nearly 100 eggs in one breeding cycle, and most of those nests are hidden deep within dense wetlands, far beyond easy human reach. While Florida continues to struggle with controlling Burmese pythons, a completely different image has been quietly spreading across social media. It is the honey badger, a small mammal native mainly to Africa, the Middle East, and parts of South Asia, with no ecological connection to the Everglades or North America. Yet in just a few short years, its name has escaped the boundaries of academic biology and become a global phenomenon, familiar to millions of people worldwide. Videos capturing honey badgers confronting cobras, being bitten, collapsing, then getting back up and continuing the attack, have drawn tens of millions of views. Some clips show them driving hyenas away from carcasses. Others depict honey badgers recklessly raiding beehives, enduring hundreds of stings to steal honey. In a few rare scenes, they even face lions or leopards without fleeing. On the internet, the honey badger quickly earned a dramatic nickname, the animal that fears nothing. That reputation does not come from size or brute strength. Honey badgers weigh only a few dozen kilograms at most, with short, stocky bodies that hardly resemble an apex predator. What captivates people lies in their attitude. Honey badgers rarely retreat. When threatened, their instinct is not to run, but to turn and fight back. Their bodies are protected by thick, loose skin that allows them to twist even when caught in a predator's jaws. Powerful jaws, sharp claws, and a high tolerance for pain make them unpredictable opponents in brief, violent encounters. In the wild, honey badgers are solitary, intelligent, and extremely adaptable. They dig burrows, open locks, climb fences, and are regarded by researchers as among the best problem solvers within the mustelid family. This combination of fearlessness, resilience, and sheer unmanageability has transformed the honey badger in the public imagination into a symbol of defiance. And it is from this point, against the backdrop of Florida's deadlock with Burmese pythons, that a question began to circulate in whispers. If honey badgers are not afraid of snakes, could they confront something even larger, a python? At first, the question existed only as an internet joke, surfacing in comment sections, memes, and debates driven more by entertainment than by science. But as time passed, and as conventional control measures repeatedly revealed their limitations, the tone surrounding that question began to shift. It was no longer just a humorous idea. It became a recurring hypothesis, not in official reports, but in side conversations, where prolonged stalemate made people willing to consider possibilities once dismissed outright. Two species from different continents, shaped by entirely unrelated evolutionary pressures, never meant to share the same habitat, suddenly found themselves linked in a single ecological narrative. Not because they had any natural connection, but because when humans confront a crisis slipping beyond control, they begin searching for an exit, no matter how fragile that possibility may be. When honey badgers are taken out of viral internet clips and examined through real field data, the story changes quickly. Science does not support the idea of the honey badger as a snake-killing machine. In the wild, snakes make up less than a quarter of their diet. Most of the time, honey badgers choose prey that is easier to obtain: bird eggs, small mammals, amphibians, insects, and even carrion. Confrontations with venomous snakes represent only a small fraction of their behavior, and usually occur when other options are limited. Their resistance to venom is also widely misunderstood. Honey badgers are not completely immune. After being bitten, they can lose consciousness for several minutes, sometimes even hours, and survive only because of their body's rapid recovery. This is a biological advantage, but it is far from miraculous. More importantly, honey badgers are omnivorous, powerful diggers, and extremely difficult to control. In a fragile environment like the Everglades, they would not only hunt pythons, they would prey on whatever is most accessible, from turtle eggs and ground-nesting birds to amphibians and small mammals. In that scenario, the much-hoped-for solution could easily become a new source of pressure, pushing an already stressed ecosystem closer to its breaking point. The idea of using one species to control another is not new. Throughout ecological history, it has repeatedly surfaced whenever humans find themselves at an impasse. And almost every time, the outcome has produced consequences that last far longer than originally anticipated. The cane toad in Australia is a classic example. Introduced to control pests in sugarcane fields, the species quickly escaped human control, poisoned native wildlife, and became a biological disaster that has persisted for decades. What these stories have in common is not the animals themselves, but the way humans approach the problem. When an ecosystem has already been disrupted, the instinctive response is to search for a solution that is strong, fast, and seemingly logical. One invasive species appears, so another is introduced to counter it. In theory, this looks like a simple balancing act, but nature does not operate through such clean opposing pairs. Every introduced species brings its own behaviors, needs, and impacts, often extending far beyond what humans can predict. In that context, the idea of the honey badger is not merely a biological hypothesis, but a focal point of controversy, caught between the desire for control and the fear of repeating old mistakes. Today, Florida stands as one of the fastest-growing states in the United States. Coastal cities continue to expand. New residential developments rise along the edges of forests. Tourism, real estate, and modern infrastructure give South Florida an image of energy and prosperity. For many people, the Everglades is little more than a green strip at the edge of the map, a national park tucked behind highways and resort complexes. Yet behind that modern facade, a quiet conflict is still unfolding. Burmese pythons continue to survive and spread through wetlands that urban development has not yet reached. Florida no longer speaks in terms of eradicating the species. Instead, a more cautious concept has taken hold: control. Python hunting programs continue. Professional removal teams remain active. New technologies are still being tested, but even those directly involved understand that this is not a campaign with a clear end in sight. The Everglades today exists alongside human expansion, an ancient ecosystem forced to adapt to a threat that never appeared in its evolutionary history. Florida moves steadily forward, and the battle with the Burmese python continues quietly in the background. The story of Burmese pythons and honey badgers is not just about two animal species. It reflects the way humans confront the consequences of their own actions. A decision that once seemed harmless can end up redirecting an entire ecosystem. Whether honey badgers will ever truly appear in the Everglades or remain nothing more than a rumor, the fact that the idea has spread so widely reveals a deeper truth. Florida is trapped in a crisis with no definitive solution. Can humans learn to live alongside the disasters they have created, or will they continue to pay the price for each new intervention? In the first half of the 20th century, when the southern United States was still defined by endless grasslands and massive herds of cattle, a silent biological nightmare began to spread. It did not arrive with gunfire or natural disasters, but hid within the body of a tiny insect, the screwworm fly. Known scientifically as Cochleomya hominivorax, the eater of human flesh, this species spread terror from Texas to Florida. All it took was a small scratch on a cow's skin, a bite from another insect, or even the still unhealed navel of a newborn calf. From miles away, a female fly could detect the wound. She would lay hundreds of eggs inside the exposed flesh, and within days, pale white larvae would begin consuming the animal's tissue while it was still alive. Livestock weakened rapidly, dying from blood loss or severe infection, as farmers stood helpless, watching their livelihoods destroyed from the inside. Each year, hundreds of thousands of animals died because of the screwworm. Wildlife populations collapsed, and even humans were not safe. Medical records documented cases of maggot infestations in ears, noses, and open wounds, turning the American South into a true biological battlefield. U.S. agriculture lost an estimated $100 million annually, an enormous sum at a time when every single cow was a pillar of survival and economic stability. Under growing pressure from the screwworm fly, American farmers and the U.S. government refused to sit still. They tried everything within reach. Chemicals became the first line of defense. Toxic solutions were applied directly to livestock wounds, in hopes of killing the larvae before it was too late. Biological fly traps were hung densely around farms, pastures, and barns. Crop-dusting planes flew over vast stretches of Texas and Florida, blanketing entire ecosystems with insecticides. But the harder they fought back, the clearer it became that the United States was losing an uneven war. Chemicals only came into play after wounds had already formed, after the flies had laid their eggs. They treated the symptoms, not the root cause. Meanwhile, the screwworm possessed a terrifying biological advantage. A single female could fly hundreds of kilometers in search of a new host, crossing farm boundaries, state lines, and even national borders. No fence was high enough, no amount of pesticide sufficient to break their life cycle. With each breeding season that passed, the losses continued to pile up. After years of fighting in vain, American scientists were forced to accept a hard truth. They could not defeat the screwworm fly through brute force. Chemicals offered only temporary relief, while traditional control methods were always slower than the insect's explosive reproductive cycle. It was clear that the war required a different approach, not reacting after the damage was done, but intervening at the very beginning. In 1937, inside laboratory walls, a seemingly small discovery changed everything. Scientists realized that female screwworm flies mate only once during their entire lifetime. If that single mating occurred with a male incapable of reproduction, then every egg she laid would remain permanently unhatched. This was the screwworm's Achilles heel. From that moment, a bold idea began to take shape. Instead of chasing and killing individual flies in the wild, why not let the species bring about its own end? The concept went against every instinct of the time, yet it was rooted entirely in biological law. And so the sterile insect technique, known as SIT, was born, not as a temporary fix, but as a strategy capable of changing the course of the entire war. Once the sterile insect technique, SIT, proved viable in the laboratory, the United States quickly faced a far bigger question. How could a scientific concept be transformed into a weapon powerful enough to operate on a national scale? For SIT to work, the number of sterile male flies released had to completely overwhelm the wild screwworm population. That meant an unprecedented task, raising tens of millions of flies every single week, reliably, precisely, and without interruption. The US soon began constructing massive biological facilities in Mexico and Panama. These were not small research labs, but full-scale industrial complexes operating around the clock. Inside vast buildings, billions of screwworm larvae were reared on specialized feeding trays, under tightly controlled conditions of temperature, humidity, and developmental timing. Even the slightest deviation could render an entire batch useless. At the precise pupal stage, the insects were passed through chambers of gamma radiation. The goal was not to kill the flies, but to damage the DNA in their reproductive cells, enough to make them sterile, while keeping them strong enough to fly, seek mates, and compete with wild males. The pupae were then carefully packaged, chilled, and transported by aircraft to their release zones. And then, when everything was ready, millions of sterile flies were released from the sky, not as an experiment, but as a silent military-style operation. From aircraft flying along the Panamanian Isthmus, small boxes filled with screwworm pupae were dropped evenly over jungles and grasslands. But why Panama and not the US border? The answer lies in geography. The US-Mexico border stretches for more than 3,000 kilometers, far too wide to sustain a biological campaign that demands precise density and constant monitoring. In contrast, the Panamanian Isthmus, which connects North and South America, narrows to just about 80 kilometers at the Darien Gap. This is the continent's only natural bottleneck, where any screwworm population migrating north from South America is forced to pass. By pushing the screwworm southward and stopping it at this narrow point, the United States turned Panama into an invisible biological barrier. Every week, millions of sterile flies were released to overwhelm the wild population, completely disrupting their reproductive cycle. No gunfire, no chemicals. Yet the results lasted for decades. But the story did not end with livestock. As the screwworm was pushed back, another threat began to rise. Smaller, more familiar, and far more dangerous to humans. If the screwworm had once been the nightmare of southern farmers, the mosquito would become the nightmare of every American household in the 21st century. In Florida, Texas, and many southern states, Aedes aegypti mosquitoes are more than just a nuisance. They carry dengue fever, Zika, and West Nile, threats once considered tropical diseases, but now appearing on American soil. Unlike the screwworm fly, mosquitoes do not destroy cattle. They target humans directly. What makes this threat especially dangerous is its unsettling closeness. Aedes aegypti does not need jungles or swamps to survive. It is perfectly adapted to urban environments, thriving inside densely populated neighborhoods where people live their daily lives. Just a small amount of standing water, in plant pots, trash bins, drains, or old tires, is enough for their life cycle to begin. Unlike biological disasters that erupt visibly, mosquitoes spread danger silently. Every bite is a potential risk. Every infection a delayed warning. This has placed immense pressure on public health systems, no less severe than the strain once faced by American agriculture during the height of the screwworm crisis. For decades, humanity's first instinct when facing mosquitoes has always been chemicals. Fogging trucks drive through neighborhoods, aircraft spray insecticides over wetlands, and mosquito control campaigns are launched every summer with the same hope: eliminate the threat as quickly as possible. But just like with the screwworm in the past, reality soon revealed that this was only a short-term solution, one that grew less effective over time. Large-scale spraying creates a dangerous, vicious cycle. Mosquitoes that survive each round of chemicals quickly develop resistance and pass those traits on to the next generation. The more chemicals are used, the faster mosquito populations adapt. Meanwhile, insecticides do not kill mosquitoes alone. They affect beneficial insects, birds, and entire urban ecosystems that are already fragile, driving up the environmental cost year after year. More importantly, chemicals only address the surface of the problem. They kill adult mosquitoes in flight, but leave untouched the millions of eggs and larvae developing silently in standing water. Once the chemicals dissipate, the mosquito life cycle resumes, and the threat returns within weeks. When chemicals no longer provided answers, American scientists returned to a way of thinking that had once helped them win in the past, but this time at a far more refined and precise level. The sterile insect technique, or SIT, was revived. No longer aimed at the screwworm fly, it was now redirected at the very mosquito species threatening human lives. Inside modern laboratories, male mosquitoes are bred in massive numbers with every stage of development tightly controlled. They are sterilized using advanced biological and technological methods, ensuring they can no longer reproduce while fully retaining their natural behaviors. Strong flight, effective mate competition, and the ability to locate females. These sterile males are then released into the environment using drones and small aircraft, precisely targeting individual neighborhoods and epidemiological hotspots. There are no poisons, no chemical fog blanketing cities. Instead, there is a quiet but persistent strategy. When female mosquitoes mate with sterile males, their life cycle ends right there. No next generation. No sudden outbreaks, just a gradual, controlled decline, following the rules of biology itself. The greatest difference from the 20th century lies in precision. Modern technology allows mosquito populations to be monitored in real time, with release numbers adjusted for each neighborhood and each season. Biology is no longer an emergency measure. It has become a proactive defense system, designed to protect humans at the very root of the threat. Today, when Americans look back at the war against the screwworm, they realize it was more than just a victory for livestock farming. The techniques once developed to protect cattle herds, farmlands, and the livelihoods of southern farmers are now being repurposed to confront a far greater threat: diseases that directly impact human lives. What has changed is not only the target being protected, but the scale and meaning of the battle itself. In the 20th century, biology was used to save agriculture from collapse. In the 21st century, that same biology has become the first line of defense for public health. The battlefield is no longer pastures or barns, but neighborhoods, cities, and healthcare systems. What unites both eras is a proactive mindset. Instead of waiting for damage to occur and then reacting, the United States chose to intervene at the root, cutting off the reproductive cycle of the threat before the consequences could spread. While the United States has gradually transformed biology into a structured and organized defense system, in many other parts of the world, the fight against disease-carrying insects remains reactive and fragmented. In many countries across Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia, mosquitoes and other vectors are still controlled primarily through chemicals and manual measures. Spraying campaigns are launched seasonally, dependent on short-term budgets, and often only after outbreaks have already occurred. The problem is not a lack of scientific understanding, but the conditions for implementation. Deploying biological programs like SIT requires industrial-scale infrastructure, continuous epidemiological surveillance, highly trained technical teams, and coordination across multiple levels of government. For many developing nations, this represents a challenge beyond their organizational and financial capacity. This contrast highlights a crucial reality. America's success did not come from technology alone, but from its ability to sustain a long-term biological strategy, something not every country can afford or maintain. In the late 19th century, as transatlantic trade surged, an invisible passenger crossed the ocean without a passport. The European green crab, Carcinus manus, was first recorded along the eastern coast of the United States around 1817, and by the late 1800s, it had spread throughout New England. Traveling in ballast water and damp cargo holds, it set foot on a new continent. Within just a few decades, its range had extended hundreds of kilometers. By the mid-20th century, green crabs were found from New Jersey to Nova Scotia. And they didn't just arrive, they took root. Green crab larvae can remain in the water column for 4 to 6 weeks, long enough to drift hundreds, even more than 1,000 kilometers on ocean currents. A single female can carry up to 185,000 eggs per brood and reproduce multiple times over her lifetime. Even if just 1% survive, thousands of new individuals can emerge from a single mother. That is why, over more than 200 years of presence, instead of declining like many species displaced from their native habitats, the green crab has continued to expand. Today, it has been recorded on at least 4 continents and is listed among the world's 100 most dangerous invasive species. What concerns ecologists is not merely the arrival of a new crab species, but the way it operates as an invasion design, dispersing widely through drifting larvae, tolerating broad ranges of temperature and salinity, reproducing exponentially, and consuming nearly any soft-bottom organism within reach of its claws. When these numbers compound season after season, the story is no longer one of simple biological migration. It becomes a long-term conflict, where each breeding season is a new wave, and with every passing year, the map of its distribution stretches just a little further. When green crabs first appear, the initial damage may seem minor. A few clam beds with reduced yields or patches of seagrass left mottled and thin. But after only a few seasons, those scattered signs accumulate and intensify. In parts of New England, juvenile clam densities can drop by more than 50% in a single breeding season when green crab populations surge. On many tidal flats, an entire generation of shellfish can nearly vanish before it has the chance to enter the next reproductive cycle. That decline quickly echoes through local economies. In numerous coastal communities across the United States, revenue from shellfish aquaculture has fallen by millions of dollars per year during periods of green crab outbreaks. There is no dramatic catastrophe visible on the surface, just repeated predation pressure, season after season, steady and relentless. Beneath the bay floor, the changes run deeper. The green crab's constant digging disturbs sediments and uproots eelgrass, a foundational seagrass species that plays a critical role in carbon storage and provides shelter for juvenile fish and many other benthic organisms. As the substrate erodes and seagrass meadows disappear, habitat structure shifts, followed by a broader decline in biodiversity. When the damage was no longer scattered but persisted across multiple breeding seasons, humans were forced to respond. Over the past 4 decades, coastal states across North America have deployed thousands of traps to contain the European green crab. In 2022, Washington removed more than 300,000 individuals. In British Columbia, annual removals have in some years exceeded 500,000. Each control season costs millions of dollars in public funding. Yet catching more does not necessarily mean controlling more. With high reproductive capacity and strong adaptability, green crab populations rebound quickly. As a result, strategies have shifted toward early detection using eDNA technology, which can trace genetic material from just a few liters of water and shorten response times to a matter of weeks. Even so, early warning systems cannot eradicate populations that have already taken root. When mechanical removal and monitoring failed to produce a decisive breakthrough, another approach began to take shape. Instead of focusing solely on elimination, policymakers and entrepreneurs sought to redefine the invader's value. The Eat the Invader movement emerged from this logic. introducing green crab into the seafood market. But a paradox followed. If the market becomes large and stable enough, control efforts may inadvertently create an incentive to maintain supply. In that case, the goal of eradication gradually gives way to optimized harvesting. The invader does not disappear. It simply changes roles, shifting from an ecological threat to a new economic link in the chain. If in many places humans must create artificial resistance through traps, early detection technology, or even food markets, then in Chesapeake Bay that resistance seems to have already existed within the ecosystem itself. In terms of natural conditions, the bay is nearly ideal for the European green crab. Stable brackish waters, suitable temperatures, and abundant benthic prey. Yet over more than a century of presence along the U.S. East Coast, Chesapeake Bay has never recorded the kind of prolonged multi-year population peaks seen in New England or the Pacific Northwest. Why is that? The answer lies beneath the surface. Chesapeake is not a weakened habitat, but a system still dense enough to respond. Each year, the Atlantic blue crab population there can reach hundreds of millions of adults. In peak years, estimates surpass 700 million individuals. Predation pressure, therefore, is not a short-term phenomenon. It occurs every single day. If the European green crab's greatest strength is its reproductive speed, its greatest vulnerability lies in its 4 to 6 week larval stage and in the brief period just after molting. During those windows, survival rates can drop sharply under intense predation and competition from the Atlantic blue crab. And that is the core difference. While many regions must race to contain an outbreak, Chesapeake Bay has maintained a natural defensive line for decades, an ecosystem resilient enough to ensure that the European green crab's growth curve never truly has the chance to surge. However, Chesapeake Bay's natural defensive line is not immutable. It depends on water temperature, reproductive cycles, and the health of native crab populations. And all of those factors are changing. Over the past 40 years, average sea surface temperatures in the North Atlantic have risen by approximately 0.3 to 0.5 degrees Celsius per decade. For humans, that may seem minor, but for marine organisms, an increase of just 1 degree Celsius can significantly alter larval development rates and reproductive timing. Warmer waters mean longer breeding seasons, faster larval growth, and potentially higher survival rates for the European green crab. Regions that were once too cold to sustain high densities, such as Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, are now recording more consistent green crab presence. When winters are no longer harsh enough to reset populations each year, natural boundaries begin to blur. The issue is not only that green crabs may spread farther. It is whether, if temperatures continue to rise, the predation pressure from native crabs in Chesapeake Bay will remain strong enough to maintain balance. As the climate shifts, the ecosystem's safety threshold shifts with it. And once that threshold is crossed, the balance can tip very quickly. If Chesapeake Bay can maintain ecological balance thanks to a sufficiently large native crab population, that same population also sustains a seafood industry worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Each year, the bay alone generates roughly $300 million from the harvest and processing of the Atlantic blue crab, Calanectes cepidus. Thousands of traditional watermen, many continuing family trades passed down through generations, depend directly on the migration cycles, spawning seasons, and molting rhythms of this species. Across the United States, blue crab landings fluctuate significantly depending on biological cycles and environmental conditions, but in stable years they can exceed 100 million pounds. Notably, nearly the entire commercial supply still comes from wild capture. Unlike shrimp or salmon, species that have been successfully domesticated in industrial aquaculture systems, blue crabs are extremely difficult to farm at scale due to their cannibalistic behavior, high mortality after molting, and complex water quality requirements. For that reason, the industry operates in a delicate equilibrium. Harvest levels must be high enough to sustain local economies, provide jobs for thousands of workers, and supply restaurants, processing plants, and export markets, yet not so high that the population becomes depleted. As climate change alters water temperature, salinity, and spawning timing, the entire value chain, from watermen on the bay to canning lines and processing facilities, feels the impact directly. And in the end, everything truly begins at the surface of the water. Peak blue crab harvest season usually begins in late spring, when water temperatures rise and blue crabs become more active. Fishing boats deploy hundreds, sometimes more than 1,000, square bottom-set traps each day. Each trap can yield between 1 and 3 kilograms of crabs, depending on density and tidal conditions. On high-yield days, a small vessel can bring back several hundred kilograms after a hauling round that lasts many hours. The bait typically used is forage fish or chicken, inexpensive protein sources with a strong enough scent to trigger feeding responses in turbid water. Trap design is not accidental. One-way funnel entrances allow crabs to crawl in, but make it difficult for them to escape. The square frame helps the trap remain stable on the soft mud bottom of brackish marshes, reducing the chance of tipping in strong currents. As a result, the crabs are kept alive and claw breakage is minimized, a direct factor in commercial value since intact claws mean higher dockside prices. Harvesting is not merely mechanical work. Watermen must understand molting cycles, identify egg-bearing females for release, and comply with minimum size regulations, typically at least 5 inches across the carapace. Smaller individuals are returned to the water to ensure the population reaches maturity for the following season. The work repeats with each tidal shift, requiring fishers to closely monitor weather, wind, and salinity. However, when temperatures drop and crab activity declines, yields decrease noticeably. This demonstrates how tightly the industry depends on natural biological rhythms that may shift if the climate continues to warm. And once the crabs are brought ashore, the race against time begins. After harvest, blue crabs are typically transported to processing plants within just a few hours. Crab meat is highly sensitive to enzymatic breakdown, so the first step is rapid chilling with ice to slow biochemical processes. Only individuals that meet commercial size standards enter the processing line, ensuring that the meat yield justifies production costs. In the canning process, crabs are boiled for approximately 8 to 12 minutes, long enough to coagulate proteins without causing excessive shrinkage of the muscle fibers. They are then rapidly cooled, the carapace removed, and the gills and inedible parts discarded. The meat picking stage requires considerable skill, as the goal is to preserve the integrity of the muscle structure while minimizing shell fragments. Once sorted by grade, the meat is packed directly into cans according to standardized weights, hermetically sealed, and pasteurized to ensure food safety. An 8-ounce can of pasteurized crab meat on the market can range from $25 to $40, reflecting the high value of this ingredient. That value comes not only from flavor, but from the entire operational chain, from the brackish ecosystem and tidal rhythms, to harvesting techniques and the precise hand movements of workers picking meat in the plant. For that reason, the story of the blue crab is not merely a biological or invasive species narrative. It is a story about how humans attempt to balance exploitation and conservation, market forces and ecosystems, in an ocean that is changing faster than ever before. The story of the green crab begins with a silent invasion beneath the seafloor, but it ends with a much larger question: the question of ecological thresholds. A species capable of producing hundreds of thousands of eggs each season can still be restrained if the ecosystem is strong enough. Rats have been living alongside New York for more than 2 centuries. The brown rat is believed to have arrived on merchant ships docking at the port in the late 18th century. As the city expanded, the rats spread with it, and as New York not only grew outward, but also dug deep underground, building sewer systems, subways, and complex infrastructure, it unintentionally created a second world where rats could live and move almost without interruption. But space is only part of the story. What truly makes New York an ideal environment for rats is the density of human activity. Every day, millions of residents generate enormous amounts of waste. Even though the sanitation system operates continuously, there are always gaps. Trash bags left on sidewalks, overflowing bins, temporary collection points. For humans, this is excess. For rats, it is a stable food source. Rats need only a few dozen grams of food and water each day. In a city that never sleeps, those needs are almost always met. Over time, they have fully adapted to urban life, operating in parallel with humans and becoming part of the city's very structure. For many years, the number of rats in New York existed only as speculation. Popular stories claimed there were more rats than people, but there was little concrete evidence. Accurately counting a species that lives underground, behind walls, and largely out of sight is nearly impossible. In 2014, the picture became clearer. A statistician used data from the city's 311 system, where residents report rat sightings, to build an estimation model. The results suggested that New York might be home to around 2 million rats. The figure sparked debate, but it was considered the first reasonable estimate based on real data. Nearly a decade later, new analyses indicate the population may have risen to close to 3 million, an increase of about 50% in just over 10 years. This reflects the rats' remarkable reproductive capacity and adaptability in urban environments. Under favorable conditions, a single pair of rats can produce hundreds of descendants within just a few years. At this scale, the rat issue is no longer about individual animals, it becomes a challenge for the entire urban system. When the rat population reaches into the millions, their impact extends far beyond the brief glimpses people catch on sidewalks. The issue is no longer just about discomfort or urban aesthetics. It involves concrete consequences that are subtle, yet widespread throughout the city's operational structure. Rats have a constant gnawing instinct to wear down their teeth, a seemingly small biological trait that creates significant problems in urban environments. Electrical wiring, insulation materials, pipes, and protective infrastructure layers can all become targets. Numerous power outages, electrical short circuits, and system damages have been linked to rodent activity, particularly in areas with aging and deteriorating infrastructure. The impact on public health is equally concerning. Rats frequently come into contact with garbage, sewage, and polluted environments, potentially carrying bacteria, parasites, and other pathogens. Vulnerable groups, such as children, the elderly, and residents living in limited sanitation conditions, are of particular concern. Alongside this is a quiet but persistent economic burden. The costs of infrastructure repairs, pest control, sanitation reinforcement, and monitoring efforts accumulate into substantial annual losses. Despite significant investment by the city, the problem persists, raising a deeper question. Are we addressing the root causes, or merely touching the surface of a system that has fallen out of balance? When mechanical and chemical measures fail to deliver lasting results, people often turn to a familiar idea: introducing predators. In nature, rats have many natural enemies, so if these predators are brought into urban environments, could they help restore balance to the population? The idea sounds reasonable and has appeared many times throughout history. Cats, for example, have long been seen as natural counterparts to rats. In agricultural settings and grain storage facilities, they once played an important role in limiting rodent populations. However, a city is not a natural ecosystem. It is an artificial environment where food sources are unevenly distributed, spaces are fragmented, and ecological relationships are disrupted. Introducing a predator into such a setting is not as straightforward as it might be in the wild. History shows that many attempts to control rats using predators may seem effective at first, but over time can produce unintended consequences. One commonly cited example comes from isolated islands. In the 1950s, several areas of Borneo faced a severe malaria outbreak. To control the disease-carrying mosquitoes, authorities launched widespread insecticide spraying campaigns. Mosquito populations declined, but the ecosystem did not stop there. The chemicals also affected other species in the food chain, particularly cats. As the cat population dropped sharply, an ecological gap emerged. Rats, which had previously been kept in check by predation, began to multiply rapidly. They damaged crops and threatened local food supplies. What had started as a side effect soon became a direct and serious problem. By 1960, authorities were forced to intervene again with an unusual operation, reintroducing cats, some of which were even parachuted in from airplanes. In the context of an isolated island with a relatively simple ecosystem and limited space, the solution proved temporarily effective. However, that success depended entirely on the island's isolation, conditions that do not exist in large urban environments. And not every place has ended with a story like Borneo's. If Borneo showed that cats could be effective under highly specific conditions, then Astola Island presents the opposite outcome. Here, cats were introduced to control rats, pests that affected fishing activities and threatened nesting seabird populations. At first, rat numbers declined, and the pressure on human activity temporarily eased, creating a sense of success. But ecosystems do not remain static. Within a short time, the cats adapted and expanded their diet to easier prey, such as bird eggs and chicks. The island's ecological structure quickly became disrupted. Some native populations declined sharply, while rats did not disappear entirely. The ecological damage became more evident than the initial benefits. On a far larger scale, Australia provides another powerful example. Since the 18th century, cats introduced to the continent gradually established feral populations numbering in the millions. Numerous studies indicate that they have contributed to the decline and extinction of dozens of native species. Australia's experience demonstrates that what appears to be a simple biological solution can produce consequences lasting decades, sometimes reshaping entire ecosystems. So why, after all those ecological lessons, can't cats control rats in a city like New York City? During observation periods, lasting several months in areas where both cats and rats were present, cases in which cats had a direct and measurable impact on rat populations were extremely rare. The reason lies in the characteristics of urban rats themselves. Compared to rural rats, city rats are typically larger, stronger, and far more cautious. An adult rat living in New York's sewer system can weigh several times more than a field rat. For a cat, confronting such prey carries a significant risk of injury, with relatively little energy reward. When safer and easier food sources are available, cats simply avoid the risk. Moreover, rats display remarkable behavioral adaptability. In the presence of cats, they do not disappear. They adjust. They reduce activity in open spaces and instead move through cracks, pipes, and underground structures that are difficult for cats to access. Rather than being eliminated, rats shift their activity patterns to avoid predators, while the overall population remains largely unaffected. This paradox explains why, despite having hundreds of thousands of free-roaming cats, New York continues to struggle with rats. In the modern urban environment, cats are no longer effective rat predators. At best, they create temporary behavioral disturbances, insufficient to change the broader outcome. Cats were not the only animals once expected to control rats. Historically, mongooses were also seen as a promising solution. In the 19th century, this predator was introduced to many tropical regions to protect agriculture from rats and other rodents. At first, events often followed a familiar pattern. Rat numbers declined, agricultural damage improved, and a sense of success quickly spread. However, this advantage did not last. Rats soon adapted, shifting their activity times and habitats to avoid the new predator. As rats became harder to catch, mongooses began to change targets. Instead of continuing to hunt rats, they turned to easier native prey: birds, eggs, reptiles, and other small animals. Food webs were disrupted, and many local populations declined rapidly. In several places, the ecological and economic damage caused by mongooses became more severe than the original rat problem. Today, in many countries, the small Indian mongoose is classified as a highly destructive invasive species. These examples are not exceptions. They reflect a recurring pattern. Introducing predators to solve rat problems often produces short-term effects while leaving behind long-term consequences that are far harder to control. Which brings us to the core question. If we cannot rely on predators, what other path remains for humans to manage urban rat populations? In the end, the answer does not lie in finding yet another predator, but in addressing the very thing that has sustained rats for centuries: urban waste. Rats do not thrive because they are exceptionally powerful, but because cities inadvertently provide them with an almost limitless supply of resources. Every unsealed garbage bag, every uncovered bin, every poorly managed collection point becomes a stable food warehouse for rodents. From an ecological perspective, eliminating individual rats does not solve the problem as long as food remains abundant. A species with such a high reproductive capacity will quickly replace any lost numbers. In contrast, when the food supply is cut off, the entire system begins to shift. Rats are forced into harsher competition, survival rates decline, and natural reproduction slows. In recent years, New York has started to move in this direction. The city has introduced standardized, sealed trash containers, adjusted collection schedules more effectively, and strengthened sanitation inspections in residential and commercial areas. These measures do not create immediate spectacle, nor do they deliver the feeling of a quick victory. But unlike previous campaigns, they are grounded in scientific evidence and long-term data. The core of this approach is systemic change, rather than launching another battle. When food sources are restricted and shelter is reduced, rats do not need to be exterminated en masse to decline. They simply no longer have the conditions necessary to sustain high population levels. At that point, the rat problem is no longer a confrontation between humans and an animal species, but a measure of how a city organizes, manages, and takes responsibility for its own living environment. The fire ant invasion didn't unfold with explosions or chaotic scenes. It began quietly nearly a century ago, when tiny ants accidentally arrived in the US aboard cargo ships from South America. No one noticed them. There were no warnings, no prevention plans. Yet America gave this insect the perfect conditions: a warm climate, abundant food, and, most importantly, almost no natural predators. In just a few decades, fire ants spread across more than 300 million acres, from southern livestock farms to densely populated neighborhoods. On each acre they invade, dozens of colonies may exist, each home to hundreds of thousands of ants, operating like a vibrant underground city. The total economic damage caused by fire ants is estimated at over $6 billion per year, a number large enough to rank them among the most dangerous invasive species in the US. What's frightening isn't their size, but their speed and resilience. Unlike natural disasters, fire ants don't retreat after a season. They adapt, reproduce, and expand their territory year after year. Every time humans try to wipe them out, fire ants find new ways to survive. And it's that quiet persistence that has turned a tiny insect into one of the most stubborn ecological crises in American history. You know, the fire ant invasion isn't just happening in fields or farms, it's creeping straight into human life. In residential areas across the southern US, fire ants show up right in people's yards, on school lawns, and in public parks. One wrong step can trigger hundreds of ants to attack at once. Each year, tens of thousands of Americans are hospitalized due to fire ant stings. For children and those with severe allergies, just a few dozen stings can cause anaphylactic shock. These tiny swarms have forced schools to temporarily shut down, playgrounds to be fenced off, and neighborhoods to spend millions of dollars annually just to keep the ground safe to walk on. Unlike mosquitoes or bees, fire ants don't attack at random. When their nest is disturbed, they respond like a military unit, swarming up clothing, locking on with their jaws, and stinging repeatedly. The greatest fear isn't one ant, it's the entire swarm attacking at once. As the destructive power of fire ants became more evident, humans were forced to take action. Pesticides were spread across fields and neighborhoods. Ant nests were dug up, burned, or flooded in efforts to wipe them out completely. In the short term, these measures gave a sense of victory. The nests disappeared. The ground fell quiet for a while. But that silence didn't last. Soon after, the fire ants returned. New mounds appeared right next to the old ones. When flooded, they linked their bodies into floating rafts, carrying the queen and larvae to safety. When poisoned, the colonies split apart, forming smaller satellite nests, making them even harder to control. Each human attempt to eliminate the ants didn't destroy them, it taught them how to adapt. Chemical treatments also came with another cost. They didn't just kill fire ants, but also wiped out native insects, weakened ecosystems, and forced people to repeat the process over and over. Costs increased, treatment areas expanded, but the end result stayed the same. The fire ants never disappeared. They were only pushed back temporarily, before spreading again. After decades, one truth became clear. Brute force, chemicals, and technology couldn't keep up with the reproductive speed and adaptability of a tiny insect. This battle didn't fail due to a lack of resources, but because humans were trying to impose control on a living ecosystem. And from that moment, a question emerged. Why haven't fire ants exploded in numbers in South America, their place of origin? The answer lies in a natural enemy that fire ants have faced over millions of years of evolution: the phorid fly, more chillingly known as the ant decapitating fly. Unlike pesticides or poison baits, phorid flies don't eliminate fire ants through sheer numbers, but through behavior. The female fly can precisely identify a fire ant among hundreds of insect species. In less than a second, it injects an egg into the ant's body. The larva hatches, grows inside, and eventually kills the ant after several days. But more importantly, during the presence of the fly causes the entire colony to stop foraging, stop attacking, and enter a constant state of alert. Since the late 1990s, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has launched large-scale breeding and release programs for phorid flies. Millions of flies were bred in labs and released across southern states. Unlike chemicals that need repeated application, phorid flies reproduce and spread on their own. Surveys later showed that in areas where the flies were released, worker fire ant populations dropped by an average of 10 to 15%. But the greatest impact came from behavioral change. The ants became less aggressive, their foraging areas shrank, and their territorial expansion slowed noticeably. For the first time in this decades-long battle, humans didn't try to impose total control, but instead worked to restore balance to the ecosystem. The ant decapitating fly doesn't wipe out fire ants, but it did what every previous method failed to do. It made the spread of fire ants no longer unchecked. But right at what seemed to be the most hopeful point, the limitations began to show. While phorid flies altered fire ant behavior and reduced worker numbers by 10 to 15%, the colonies did not collapse. In fact, the total area controlled by fire ants in the U.S. did not shrink. It remained at over 300 million acres. The invasion had slowed, but it hadn't stopped. The reason lies in an advantage the flies couldn't touch: reproduction speed. Each year, fire ant colonies release millions of queens during mating flights. Even if only a small fraction survive and establish nests, dozens of new colonies are born. Even under constant pressure from the flies, the remaining 85 to 90% of worker ants are still enough to rebuild the colony quickly. Scientists also discovered something else. Fire ants learn quickly. In areas with strong fly activity, the ants began to shift their foraging times, reduce surface movement, and avoid open spaces, precisely where the flies are most effective. The flies didn't disappear, but their hunting effectiveness declined over time as the ants adapted their survival strategies. More importantly, phorid flies can't kill the queen, the true heart of every colony. As long as the queen lives, the colony lives. After more than 2 decades of observation, scientists reached a cautious conclusion. The ant decapitating fly is not a killing weapon, but a tool of control. It helps slow the invasion, reduce aggressiveness, and give the ecosystem breathing room. But it cannot end the war. The battle against fire ants forced the United States to accept a hard truth. Not every invasive species can be eradicated, but fire ants aren't the only case. While scientists were still working to control the underground colonies, another threat was quietly approaching, not crawling across land, but drifting along rivers. Asian carp were introduced to the US decades ago with a seemingly harmless purpose: to clean fish farms and control algae. But like fire ants, they quickly escaped human control. With no strong natural predators, rapid reproduction, and a voracious appetite, carp began to dominate major river systems. And now, America's greatest concern is no longer in southern fields, but at the doorstep of the Great Lakes, North America's largest freshwater ecosystem. If Asian carp enter the Great Lakes, the consequences could far exceed a typical biological invasion. They could collapse the food chain, push native fish species to the brink of extinction, and threaten a fishing industry worth billions of dollars annually. Unlike fire ants, carp cannot be controlled with simple chemicals or biological agents. And once they establish a stable population, every effort afterward becomes merely defensive. To stop Asian carp from reaching the Great Lakes, the US has concentrated nearly all efforts on two major lines of defense. The first lies in the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal, a rare connection point between the Mississippi River Basin and Lake Michigan. Here, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers operates underwater electric barriers, generating constant pulses strong enough to turn the carp away. Alongside this is large-scale harvesting. Thousands of tons of carp are captured each year using nets and specialized vessels, aiming to reduce biological pressure from downstream. No method can fully eliminate the carp, but much like the fire ant fight, they help the U.S. buy time, the most precious resource when facing an invasive species that's dangerously close to the point of no return. If fire ants dominate the land and Asian carp threaten the rivers, then beneath the warm waters of Florida, another invasion is unfolding in silence. Lionfish began appearing in U.S. waters in the late 1980s. At first, they were just a few unfamiliar shapes among the coral reefs. But like fire ants and carp, they quickly defied all expectations. With no natural predators, lionfish reproduce year-round and hunt with astonishing efficiency. A single adult lionfish can prey on over 50 species of small fish and marine organisms, including key species that maintain the balance of reef ecosystems. In just a few decades, lionfish have spread across the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, and along Florida's coastline, causing sharp declines in native fish populations. What makes lionfish an ecological nightmare isn't just their numbers, but their speed. A single female can release over 2 million eggs per year, and most of those eggs drift freely on ocean currents, expanding their invasion far beyond any geographical barrier. Chemicals can't be used in marine environments. Biological controls are also unfeasible. And just like with fire ants, once lionfish establish stable populations, all later efforts become focused only on damage control. Faced with this threat, the U.S. can't build fences or isolate regions like it did with carp. The only solution left is for humans to directly join the hunt. Divers are mobilized to manually spear lionfish. Eat the Invader campaigns encourage restaurants to serve lionfish on their menus. This isn't a victory, it's a compromise, turning an invasive species into a resource in hopes of slowing its spread. The battles against fire ants, Asian carp, or lionfish are just the most visible fronts in a much larger conflict. In reality, the United States is facing over 500 officially recorded invasive animal species, with around 300 of them classified as causing serious harm to agriculture, infrastructure, and ecosystems. Each year, the U.S. spends an estimated $120 billion to monitor, control, and repair the damage caused by invasive species. But unlike traditional wars, this one has no victory day. Control programs stretch on for decades, constantly shifting strategies and rarely achieving total eradication. In many cases, success is simply defined by preventing the damage from getting worse. What makes this fight especially difficult lies in the structure of modern society itself. Every year, U.S. seaports handle over 11 million containers, tens of thousands of ships, and hundreds of millions of international passengers. Global trade, maritime transport, tourism, and climate change have unintentionally created biological highways, allowing invasive species to spread faster than ever. A single cargo ship, an untreated wooden crate, or a major storm can be enough to carry a new species across oceans and establish a population within just a few years. As a result, America's strategy has gradually shifted from reaction to prevention. Biological control, early detection systems, strict quarantine laws, and public education are being prioritized over heavy-handed tactics. The fight against invasive species is no longer about eliminating each one individually, but about racing to keep ecosystems from tipping past the point of no return, where every intervention becomes purely defensive. Today, most oysters no longer grow randomly in the wild. They are, in a sense, designed to feed humans. Modern oyster farming begins not in the open sea, but in tightly controlled artificial tanks. Carefully selected, healthy broodstock oysters are placed into these systems, where temperature, salinity, and light are precisely adjusted to stimulate year-round spawning rather than relying on natural seasons. After fertilization, the eggs develop into free-swimming larvae in tanks holding 400 to 500 liters of water, each containing millions of tiny individuals. This is the most fragile stage of their lives. The larvae are fed freshly cultured microalgae, while the water is continuously filtered and tested to remove harmful bacteria. Even a minor deviation in water quality can cause an entire batch to fail. When the larvae are ready to attach to a surface, they are transferred to nursery tanks, where crushed oyster shells serve as a foundation. The young oysters secrete a natural adhesive, anchoring themselves to the shells and beginning rapid growth. After a few weeks, they are sorted, weaker individuals removed, leaving only the most uniform group. From there, the oysters are moved to the sea to grow out under one of two main systems, suspended in mesh bags within the water column or placed directly on the seafloor. Either way, the journey from larva to market-size oyster takes 12 to 24 months, a slow, precise process that stands in stark contrast to the hurried pace of urban life. Harvesting oysters is nothing like catching fish. There is no chase, no moment of chaos. Instead, it is a quiet race against time and environmental conditions. When oysters reach market size, typically 5 to 7 centimeters, every step of the harvest must be carefully calculated. In suspended bag systems, mesh bags holding 50 to 100 oysters are lifted using pulleys or hydraulic hoists. This method is fast, minimizes impact, and helps preserve maximum freshness. In contrast with bottom culture or wild harvesting, oysters are collected using dredges dragged along the seafloor. This approach yields large volumes but often brings up mud and gravel and can chip shells if not done precisely. Oysters are extremely sensitive to thermal shock and physical impact. When kept out of water too long or exposed to sudden temperature changes, they weaken quickly. For that reason, from the moment oysters leave the sea until they arrive at the processing facility, the entire logistics chain must be tightly controlled for time, temperature, and humidity. Even once ashore, oysters retain seawater inside their shells, as if carrying a piece of the ocean with them for protection. That is why oysters may appear motionless, yet are very much alive, still exchanging water and oxygen right up until the final moment before entering the processing line. Inside the factory, oysters enter an entirely different world, one where nature is brought under the discipline of industry. The process begins with cleaning. Oysters are passed through circulating water tanks with continuous flow, gently removing mud, algae, and organisms attached to the shells. Next, high-pressure spray systems, combined with rotating drums, knock off any stubborn residues that remain. Once the shells are clean, the oysters move onto vibrating conveyor belts for size grading. In modern facilities, optical systems further inspect shape and detect cracks in the shells. Individuals that fail to meet standards are removed by hand, because no matter how advanced technology becomes, humans remain the final layer of quality control. From here, the oysters split into two paths. Some are kept in their shells, slightly open to serve the premium live oyster market. The rest are fully shucked and enter deeper processing. Despite mechanical assistance, shucking still relies largely on skilled labor, as oyster shells are sharp, uneven, and unpredictable. A skilled worker can shuck up to 1,000 oysters per hour while preserving the meat intact. The oyster meat is then washed under high-pressure water, disinfected using ozone or light brine, and rapidly chilled to prevent bacterial growth. For canned products, the meat is placed into cans, topped with brine or light sauce, sealed and sterilized at temperatures between 115 and 121 degrees Celsius. From the seafloor to a can on the shelf, it is an industrial journey measured precisely down to each degree Celsius. Today, oysters leave factories sealed in gleaming steel cans. But long before becoming an industrial product, this species once served as the literal foundation of a city. Before streets and skyscrapers shaped Manhattan, New York was built upon something entirely different: vast oyster reefs. In the 17th century, the waters around the city contained an estimated 220,000 acres of oyster reefs, so extensive that early Dutch ships were forced to change course to avoid running aground. For the Lenape people, oysters were not merely food but a core part of life itself. Oyster shells appear in dense layers at archaeological sites, stacked across generations of survival. When Europeans arrived, oysters quickly became a culinary and commercial symbol of the young colony. By the late 19th century, New York was known as the oyster capital of the world. Oysters were everywhere in city life. Street vendors sold them by the bucket. Taverns served oyster stews to dock workers and financiers alike. Discarded shells were used as mortar for buildings and even to reclaim land from the sea, physically expanding the city. Oyster reefs filtered the water, cleared sediment, reduced wave energy, and protected shorelines, functioning both as ecosystems and as natural infrastructure. As New York grew, its appetite for oysters grew with it. Every day, millions of oysters were harvested. People did not just collect the oysters, they scraped entire reefs flat, removing the very foundation the species needed to regenerate itself. But overharvesting was only half of the story. The other half came from above the waterline. As the population exploded, untreated sewage was discharged directly into rivers and the harbor. Combined sewer systems, carrying both stormwater and household waste, became the urban standard. Tidal currents that once carried oyster larvae now carried bacteria, heavy metals, and industrial chemicals. The water grew increasingly murky, oxygen levels fell, and disease spread. By 1927, the last commercial oyster beds were forced to close. Oysters were declared unsafe to eat. Without reefs to filter the water, sediment and algae accumulated, and fish and birds lost their habitats. New York Harbor, once a symbol of abundance, became an open sewer. For decades afterward, the harbor was considered effectively dead. The city continued to rise above the water, but below the surface, an ecosystem that had existed for thousands of years had nearly vanished entirely. The turning point did not come from nature, but from law. In 1972, the U.S. Congress passed the Clean Water Act, for the first time making the discharge of untreated wastewater into rivers and waterways illegal. For New York, this marked the beginning of a monumental task: overhauling its sewer system, building wastewater treatment plants, and tracking down every source of pollution flowing into the harbor. The process took decades and cost tens of billions of dollars. Change did not come immediately, but over time it became undeniable. Water quality improved. Some fish species began to return to areas long abandoned. And then, on old wooden pilings and forgotten rocks beneath the surface, scientists discovered solitary wild oysters clinging on. They did not yet form reefs. They were not enough to cleanse the entire harbor. But they were a signal. After nearly half a century of being considered beyond repair, these waters began to show the first signs of life. The law had opened the door, but truly stepping through it would require more than words written on paper. In 2014, when water quality had only just become sufficient for life to tentatively return, a group of students from Harbor School stood on Governor's Island amid piles of discarded oyster shells collected from restaurants across the city. The idea they were pursuing sounded almost absurd: to use that very waste to rebuild oyster reefs in New York Harbor. a place long considered ecologically dead. The founders of Billion Oyster Project believed in a simple yet demanding principle. If humans could rebuild the foundation, nature would take care of the rest. Oysters do not need to be raised like industrial farmed fish. They simply require a clean surface to attach to and water conditions good enough to survive. The project began by creating a city-wide shell collection network with restaurants. Instead of being sent to landfills, tons of oyster shells were transported back to the island and left outdoors for months to fully eliminate food residue and bacteria. Once safe, the shells became substrate for laboratory-raised oyster larvae. Each batch was carefully seeded, counted, tagged, and entered into a long-term monitoring system. Every step was bound by regulation. New York strictly prohibits harvesting oysters within restoration zones. The reefs must be continuously monitored, equipped with tracking devices, and clearly marked with warning signs. Do not eat oysters. These rules slowed progress, increased costs, and placed heavy pressure on a project that was already ambitious. Skepticism appeared from the very beginning. Many viewed the Billion Oyster Project as largely symbolic, an educational initiative unlikely to generate meaningful ecological impact. Yet the project quietly expanded. By the end of 2015, millions of juvenile oysters had been deployed along piers, breakwaters, and forgotten corners of the city, places once no longer considered viable habitats. There were no miracles, only repetitive work, endless data sheets, and patience stretched across the seasons. But within that persistence, an unprecedented ecological gamble had truly begun. After years of placing shell after shell, releasing batch after batch of larvae, and patiently tracking the data, the most important question remained unanswered. Were these artificial reefs surviving only because of human intervention, or were they strong enough to bring nature back on their own? The answer came from an unexpected place. At Tappan Zee along the Hudson River, scientists conducted an experiment so minimal it was almost radical. They placed clean rock and cured oyster shells on the riverbed, without seeding any larvae at all. No active intervention, no assistance. They simply waited to see how nature would respond once the foundation was restored. The results were startling. Millions of wild oyster larvae from the Hudson River naturally found their way to the structures and attached themselves, forming approximately 5.8 million new oysters. For the first time in modern memory, a truly wild oyster reef regenerated within a water system once considered beyond recovery. And oysters did not return alone. Biological surveys recorded more than 30 marine species appearing around the new reefs. Blue crabs sheltering in the crevices, small fish returning to establish habitat, snails and shrimp rebuilding food web links that had vanished decades earlier. These reefs were no longer just a project. They had begun to function as complete ecosystems. By 2024, more than 130 million oysters were growing across nearly 19 acres of restored reef throughout New York Harbor. Yet limits remain. Disease, climate change, and sewage overflows after heavy storms continue to pressure the system. Oysters cannot replace the tens of billions of dollars wastewater infrastructure network. They are not saving New York. But they demonstrate something more profound. When humans rebuild the foundation and then step back, nature knows how to heal itself. Every year, the world raises more than 1.1 billion ducks, nearly 3 times the population of the United States. At this scale, ducks are no longer just individual poultry animals. They form a biological system managed at an industrial level. China stands as the undisputed center of this industry, accounting for roughly 97% of the global duck population. But while China represents scale, the United States represents industrialized models of control. Here, ducks are integrated into closed production chains where biology, technology, and risk management are pushed to their limits. Notably, the duck industry does not follow the same logic as industrial chicken farming. Ducks have different physiology, different water requirements, and higher biological sensitivity. This forces the industry to develop specialized systems, from breeding farms and hatcheries to vaccination protocols and flock management. On a global scale, ducks provide more than food. They represent a way humans exert control over life itself, from temperature and lighting to nutrition and reproductive timing. Every variable is calculated because even a minor deviation can result in losses affecting millions of animals. It is within this tightly controlled context that a critical question emerges. What happens when a species raised under highly industrialized systems is released back into a natural ecosystem, such as a rice field? To understand what happens when ducks are released into rice fields, we must first look at where they are created. This is not a species born in the wild, but one produced within systems of near-total control, industrial breeding farms and hatcheries. In these facilities, life does not rely on instinct, it relies on data. Every egg is carefully screened before being placed into incubation trays. Only those that meet strict standards for size, shell structure, and embryonic development are retained. From that moment on, an egg is no longer an independent biological entity. It becomes a variable in a production system. The eggs are transferred into automated incubators, where temperatures are maintained at around 37.5 degrees Celsius, while humidity and light cycles are precisely regulated to replicate natural conditions. In this environment, there is no margin for error. A deviation of just a few degrees can disrupt embryonic development. A failed batch is not merely a biological loss, it represents economic damage on the scale of millions of animals. After approximately 28 days, ducklings begin to break through their shells. Their first movements, their unsteady steps, mark the beginning of a new life cycle. Yet from the very first moment, they enter a world that has already been designed for them. A world where humans continue to control every variable, long before these birds are eventually released back into a natural ecosystem. Ducklings represent the most vulnerable stage in the entire life cycle of a duck flock. Far from the cute images often associated with them, this is the period of highest disease risk, where even minor mistakes can lead to large-scale losses. Immediately after hatching, ducklings are vaccinated to protect against dangerous diseases, most notably avian influenza. On a global scale, ducks are considered one of the poultry species most sensitive to influenza viruses. As a result, vaccination programs and biosecurity measures are designed to be exceptionally strict. Healthy individuals are then sorted and transferred to rearing farms. The transportation process itself is tightly controlled, from stocking density and temperature to travel duration. The goal is not merely to move the birds, but to minimize stress, as stress can weaken the immune system and create pathways for disease outbreaks. At this stage, ducklings begin developing critical biological responses. Their ability to locate water, react to environmental cues, and engage in social behavior is formed here. These traits will stay with them throughout their lives, whether they later live in modern farming systems or are eventually released into flooded rice fields. Duck farming is fundamentally different from chicken farming, and the key difference lies in water. Ducks are a poultry species whose physiology is closely tied to aquatic environments, from digestion to behavior. This alone requires their care systems to be designed in an entirely different way. In modern farms, feeding and water supply systems are almost fully automated. Feed is formulated to meet higher protein and energy demands than those of chickens. Water is not provided solely for drinking. It also allows ducks to perform natural behaviors, such as cleaning their bills and regulating body temperature. Reducing direct human intervention is not about saving labor, but about minimizing stress within the flock. Lower stress leads to healthier birds, reduced disease risk, and greater biological stability. At this stage, ducks have become part of an industrial egg production system, yet the way they are raised, their constant interaction with water and their surrounding environment unintentionally preserves a crucial trait: the ability to interact with ecosystems beyond the farm. This trait is largely forgotten in industrial settings, but it will return unexpectedly in the rice fields. When a flock reaches optimal age and physical condition, duck farming officially enters the egg production phase. A mature laying duck can produce between 200 and 250 eggs per year, making duck eggs the central output of the entire production system. But ducks do not behave like chickens. They are, in many ways, indifferent mothers. After laying an egg, a duck typically leaves the nest almost immediately, showing little to no instinct to incubate or protect it. This forces humans to completely replace their natural role. Eggs must be collected at the right moment, kept clean, and quickly transferred into storage or artificial incubation systems. At this stage, eggs are no longer just food. They are the outcome of a tightly controlled biological system, one that begins at breeding farms and extends through housing, nutrition, water supply, and flock behavior. Each egg represents hundreds of variables that have been precisely calibrated. Yet it is also here that a paradox emerges. While eggs symbolize controlled agriculture, where every factor is standardized, the ducks themselves retain key biological traits: the ability to move freely, to interact with water, mud, and living organisms. And once the eggs have been collected, once the industrial objective has been fulfilled, the flock steps outside the confines of the farm. From tools of production, the ducks take on a different role, no longer within a closed system of control, but within an open ecosystem. This is the moment when thousands of ducks are released into the rice fields. The moment thousands of ducks surge into a rice field almost always triggers a sense of unease. From an industrial agriculture mindset, it looks like a large-scale mistake. Young rice plants standing in flooded fields with soft mud below, and a flock of poultry trampling across the entire cultivated surface. No fences, no production lines, no visible signs of mechanical control. But after just a few hours of observation, a different behavioral pattern begins to emerge. The ducks do not attack the rice. They largely ignore the upright stalks. Instead, their attention is drawn to every small movement in the water: insects, larvae, young snails, and newly sprouting weeds. These are precisely the organisms that cause the greatest damage to rice yields, yet are extremely difficult to control with chemicals without creating serious side effects. The flock's constant movement prevents the field from ever becoming static. The fine layer of mud is gently but continuously stirred, disrupting weed root establishment and limiting algae growth. The water becomes temporarily more turbid, but this very turbidity reduces light penetration for species that compete with rice. Most importantly, this is not a single intervention. Each day, the ducks repeat thousands of small biological interactions, non-destructive on their own, yet collectively powerful enough to alter the operating rhythm of the entire field. So why release ducks into rice fields? And why do rice paddies, systems that feed more than half of the world's population, need to be rescued in the first place? Over the past several decades, rice fields have undergone a quiet transformation. Once complex flooded ecosystems, they have gradually been turned into starch-producing factories. Anything that does not directly contribute to yield is removed. Insects and microorganisms are eliminated. Biological cycles are replaced by chemicals. In China alone, roughly 4 million tons of pesticides are used every year, much of it applied to rice cultivation. At first, yields rise rapidly. But over time, soils become depleted, microbial communities collapse, and rice fields lose their ability to regenerate naturally. To maintain previous output levels, farmers are forced to apply ever-increasing amounts of chemicals. A dangerous feedback loop takes hold. Pests develop resistance, weeds adapt faster, costs rise while effectiveness declines. Rice fields become fragile, not because of a lack of technology, but because the biological buffers that once stabilized the system have been stripped away. It is in this state of imbalance that the rice duck system emerges, not as a technological upgrade, but as a counterintuitive question. What happens if a rice field is no longer forced to operate like a machine? If industrial rice farming relies on chemicals, the rice duck system relies on behavior. Ducks do not need to be programmed. They operate on instinct, and remarkably, those instincts align almost perfectly with the needs of a rice field. Ducks consume pests while they are still in their early stages, breaking insect life cycles at the source. As they move, their feet gently stir the surface mud, introducing oxygen into the soil and reducing anaerobic conditions, the primary driver of methane emissions in flooded rice paddies. Duck droppings are distributed evenly and continuously, feeding soil microorganisms without causing the nutrient shock associated with chemical fertilizers. This supports deeper, more stable root development in rice plants. No fuel, no engines, no operating schedules. Ducks work continuously throughout the day, controlling pests, improving soil structure, and sustaining natural nutrient cycles at the same time. They are living biological machines, effective not because of force but because of ecological compatibility. And when thousands of these machines operate simultaneously, the rice field begins to change in ways that can be measured. Studies conducted in China and Japan show that the rice duck system can reduce pesticide costs by 50 to 70%, while also significantly cutting the amount of chemical fertilizer required. But the more striking figures lie in emissions. Methane output from rice fields drops by 20–30% compared to conventional chemical-based farming. Methane is one of the most powerful greenhouse gases, and flooded rice paddies are among the largest sources of emissions worldwide. When ducks stir the mud and introduce oxygen into the soil, the methane-producing process is disrupted. This is an environmental impact that no chemical treatment can replicate. At the same time, the rice field ecosystem begins to recover. Water clarity improves over time. Beneficial insects return. Frogs, small fish, and other aquatic species reappear. The rice field no longer operates as a single-purpose system, but as a living network, capable of self-regulation. Most importantly, rice yields do not decline. In many cases, production remains stable while input costs fall. From modern farms, where ducks are born, raised, and tightly controlled as part of an industrial system, to flooded rice fields, where they are released and begin to move according to instinct, the role of ducks is completely transformed. Inside the farm, ducks are subjects of optimization. But once they enter the rice fields, they become ecological agents. Without chemicals, without machinery. Through natural behavior alone, duck flocks directly influence pests, soil, and water, helping the system regain its ability to self-regulate. From farm to rice field, ducks are becoming a rare bridge between industrial agriculture and ecological restoration. And perhaps, that is exactly the direction future agriculture is searching for. What do you think about this approach? Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel to continue exploring with Terran Works in our upcoming videos.